Is this Pratchett saying that, like Lord of the Rings would have been much simpler if there was a train line?
Yes, a train line straight to Mount Doom.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could commute from Mordor, then, your working life as an orc would be a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flux.
I'm Ben McKenzie.
Welcome to Pratchett, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast.
Each month, we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books or short stories with a special guest.
This month, we're particularly chuffed to be returning to Discworld with Raising Steam.
And our returning guest is educational and developmental psychologist Craig Hildebrand-Burke. Welcome back, Craig.
Thanks for having me.
Just before we started, we looked up how long it's been since you were here, and you were in one of our very last pre-lockdown episodes all the way back in January 2020.
Oof.
So it's been a while.
Yeah, it's a whole world away, I think, that time before.
And I think you were still studying at that time.
Yeah, I think I was just about to start my sort of final couple of years of training for psychology. And yeah, now I'm done. I've been doing it for the last, 5 years. Yeah. It's both short and also a long time ago.
Yeah.
It feels like you were just here, but yeah, when you put it 5 years, that's not 5 minutes.
No, not at all. I think it was Jingo we were doing that time.
It was
yeah.
A book that, to be fair, I feel like maybe we need to take another look at. But it has some interesting thematic similarities with the book that we're discussing today. I think. I mean, in some ways not, but in other ways, yeah.
Heavy politics. I mean, there's often heavy politics, but it feels like they're like particularly heavy in this one, in the bits where they fall.
This is one of the last ones I bought before completing my collection, but I found it in a, not secondhand, but like a warehouse bookstore. I think it was like the Book Grocer or something, where they get, remainders books. But for some reason they had the American edition, which has a really different cover.
Oh, yeah.
It's the first edition hardcover. As far as I can tell, the content is the same, apart from some American spelling here and there.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we'll find out if there's any weird differences between them editions.
I'm not sure we will, because the language in this is like, I had to get the dictionary out so many times. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading on my Cobra, but
you've got the new edition, the current one.
Oh, right. But yeah, I think the benefit is you can at least just kind of look up the words as they appear quite quickly. But I didn't realize how often I was doing that until you just reminded me.
There were quite a few. We'll revisit this point about uncommon words, but we don't get into any specific examples. So I wanted to record this footnote where I do give you some. So here are some of the uncommon words used by Pratchett in Raising Steam. Manumission, another word for emancipation of slaves. Auto de fe, Portuguese, although I'm probably pronouncing it terribly, for act of faith, a euphemism used by the Spanish Inquisition for burning heretics at the stake. Lagniappe, a Cajun word meaning something a bit extra, like a bonus or a gift, used a little bit like a baker's dozen. Murrain, a biblical word which means a pestilence or disease. And of course, he slips in a susurration for good measure, but I'm sure I don't need to tell you what that means. There were quite a few, but I feel like we're slipping into book discussion, so we should, before we get into it,
to the slipcover,
we should start with the reading of the blurb. Steam is rising over Discworld, driven by Mr. Simnel, the man with a flat cap and a sliding rule. He has produced a great clanging monster of a machine that harnesses the power of all the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and it's soon drawing astonished crowds. To the consternation of Ankh-Morpork's formidable patrician, Lord Vetinari, no one is in charge of this new invention. This needs to be rectified, and who better than the man he has already appointed Master of the Post Office, the Mint, and the Royal Bank, Moist von Lipwig. Moist is not a man who enjoys hard work, unless it is dependent on words, which are not very heavy and don't always need greasing. He does enjoy being alive, however, which makes a new job offer from Vetinari hard to refuse. Moist will have to grapple with gallons of grease, goblins, a fat controller with a history of throwing employees down the stairs, and some very angry dwarfs if he's going to stop it all from going off the rails.
See, I feel all jumbled about because I have a different blurb, except it's the same blurb, different order with little segues changed around. Like it has lots of the same phrases. So interesting. Which one came first, and why have they changed it for an American audience versus an Australian audience when it's essentially the same information, just presented in a new order?
Different editor, different choices, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, I would almost think just write a whole new one rather than jumbling it all about.
I do feel like this is a real concerted effort to kind of capture the plot of the book and make it, if I'm going to be honest, and I guess I'm nailing my colours to the mast a little bit here, make it more cohesive and exciting in the blurb than maybe it is in the way that it rolls out in the book.
Certainly more propulsive.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a train.
Yeah.
Another thing about the blurb, because we've all got different versions. So like Craig has the ebook, Ben has the American one. I've got, this was my first, I think this is my first new hardcover Terry Pratchett book that I bought. Because, they're expensive and I generally got them secondhand or where I could or from the library or after the fact. I think this is the first one I bought when it was out. It's got a new picture, as at the time, of him in the back in front of a train wearing a flat cap.
I've got a different one, but from the same photo shoot where he's wearing not a flat cap. That's more like an engineer's.
It's more like a railway guy's hat.
Railway engineer's cap. Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
I think he looked like he was having a really good time in that photo shoot because he's like on a steam train, and clearly he loves steam trains. You don't write this book if you're not like a bit of a gunzel. So yeah, I was impressed.
Yeah, it was nice.
We should probably establish up front. Are any of us train spotter types? Like, are any of us really into trains?
No.
No, I don't think I'd say that.
I don't dislike them, but I'm not particularly excited by them. Like it's nice to see the joy in this book, but I was kind of like, I don't understand the paying $1 to go round and round and round on it or watch them. But I have lots of people in my life who do love that stuff. So I think it's just one of those things that you love, or you're like, that's sure.
And I feel like a lot of this is like train history rather than modern train business.
I mean, it is exciting when every so often, because I do live next to a train station, and I was kind of like, oh, that's how it changed like society. People want to live close to it, because I catch the train pretty much every day. It is very convenient. I never really think about the actual thing, but every so often they'll put a steam train on when there's something. So there was a model train expo a little while ago, and they put on steam trains every so often to take people to the model train expo, and it is like particularly exciting when you hear that chuffing noise coming, because it's just that does awaken something in you, I think, from all the childhood media, all that kind of thing, like from the storybooks. Steam trains is something different, and maybe it is the novelty also because you're not seeing them all the time, so there is that joy of hearing a steam train that's different.
Yeah, I've got a train station at the end of my street, and similarly, like every now and then there'll be one that's kind of scheduled to go past and you can hear it. But I don't know, I do wonder if maybe difference between England's history with trains and ours means we're just potentially not as steeped in it.
Well, I think there's plenty of train enthusiasts in Australia for sure, but I agree with you that there is something different about the steam train, and there is something different about the history of the train, particularly in the UK, but also in the US, where obviously it was a huge part of the colonization of that country. It was a part of the, the whole horrible history of manifest destiny and, sweeping across the country as the Europeans took over the whole place. Like it's embedded in that kind of, and I think my main exposure to train stuff is through board games, because there's a huge overlap between the nerdiness of board games and the nerdiness of trains. And there's a lot of board games about trains, and I think there's quite a few things in this book that made me think of those as well.
So are you a train enthusiast? I don't think we got an answer from you, Ben.
Oh, no, not really. But again, I feel like steam trains feel different. And I think partly it's because I think if you look at a steam train and you have, you're at all mechanically inclined, you feel like, I think I could understand how this works. Whereas if you look at a modern diesel train, you can't see how it works. You'd have to lift up some flaps and get into the engine, but you can kind of see.
Yeah. Okay. Snowpiercer.
But you can kind of see with a steam train what's going on, and I think it was sort of the last big technical revolution where the average person could look at the thing and go, I kind of see how this works. Even if you didn't understand all of the incredibly important little details, you can kind of understand, okay, they boil water, it turns into steam, that pushes a thing, which pushes another thing, which pushes the wheels and makes the train go. I can understand that. Whereas I think a lot of more modern technology is much more complicated and mysterious.
Some people in the book thought they understood that, and it worked out terribly for them.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is why I say all those little details are very important. Yeah.
Have either of your copies got the map?
Yes.
Yeah, mine's got the map.
Ah, okay.
I'd forgotten about that. Usually I like to photocopy a map before it's like a fantasy book, because then you can like look at it while you're reading the book. But I forgot to this time. But I don't think I super needed it. You don't have to follow the action in the same way, because I sort of guess I have a sense of how far away things are in Discworld. They're so familiar now. But yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. I mean,
this train is not to scale.
No. No, the train is not to scale.
I hope not anyway.
Yeah. I enjoyed the map, but it is an unusual thing for a Discworld book to have a map in it.
Every book should have a map and a character list. I maintain this. They can be optional, but every book should have both of those things, so I can remember who all the people are.
A character list might have been handy for this one, which I'm sure we'll come back to. Did either of you refer to the map, though, while you were reading the book?
I completely forgot about it.
Yeah, there isn't one in my copy.
Oh, no.
I mean, often the ebook ones are, tiny and you can't see anything anyway. But I just, unless I missed it, I don't think there is one.
No, I think it might only be in the hardcover. I don't think it's in the current paperback edition, which is what the ebook would be based on. So
there is.
Oh, it is there.
Found it. It is that big.
It was quite little.
You don't even lose the details in the fold between pages. That's the nice thing about the digital one, right? That's good.
Yeah.
So for those of you who haven't read the book, or if you don't have an edition with the map in it, it is it's labelled the Ankh-Morpork and Stowe Plains Hygienic Railway. Our route is what it says in the little shield at the top, which has some cabbages on it, of course.
Nice nod to its origins.
Yeah, and it's just a section of the Discworld map, so you don't see the whole disc. That section is focused on the action in the book. So we see Ankh-Morpork and Quirm and Bionk is the correct way to pronounce that, and all of the places in between that the train visits. And I didn't really refer to it while reading the book. I did refer to it while making notes about the book. And I think one of the things that it is a big reminder of is that they really only build 2 major train lines. Yeah, which is interesting. Although there's a whole loop around Quirm, which I had forgotten is kind of how they did it in the book. I'm not sure that really comes through clearly, to be honest, because there's the one along the coast and then there's also the one that's kind of more direct.
To be fair, I don't really understand the Melbourne City loop, and I catch that like 5 out of 7, like 10 times a week, really. So,
and they're just about to change it, Liz. So
no,
you'll be able to not understand it in a new way.
Oh yeah, because they're does it mean they're adding more stations to the loop? Are they going to be added to the loop, or are they going to be like a sub loop?
No, it's like instead of the loop. So you can get out at some stations to go around the loop, or you can go straight across the loop.
I don't want more options. I just want to get to the same.
Well, I mean, you won't need to. The trains will do it for you.
Yeah, but I'll be on the train. So.
You'll be fine. But let's get into the plot of the book.
Okay.
We start with, I think it's interesting that this book really starts with a callback to a previous book because there's so much of that in this novel. We generally say you can pick up any Discworld book to start with. I think this would be a terrible Discworld book to start with because so much of it is little cameos or references to previous Discworld stuff. And you can kind of get what's going on if you haven't read those things, but I think you'd probably get sick of not feeling like you're kind of missing something if you're reading this as your first one.
It'd be like going as a +1 to a school reunion.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. But this starts in Stolat, which is where Mort is set, or quite a bit of Mort. And we meet Dick Simnel, who is the son of Ned Simnel, a character from Reaper Man. And we find out that Ned blew himself up trying to make a steam train or some kind of steam engine. And Dick has now, having learned all of his numbers and the secret of the slide rule, as he repeatedly calls it, has picked up that research and wants to build a working steam engine. And in fact, already has a working prototype, which he calls Iron Girder. And she is skeptical at first, but sees that he's determined and that he's got the talent. And he kind of reassures her, I'm not going to blow myself up. I'm doing all of the maths. I know exactly what needs to happen, and I'm testing everything. I'm being very safe and serious about this. And she's like, okay, well, then you can have your granddad's chest of pirate gold to get you started on this endeavor, which I thought it's just it's a nice start, but I think it also sets the tone for the book that for the most part, no one really faces any real serious obstacles. Does that seem like a fair summation?
Yeah, I mean, things just happen. It's just, I think I was reading something along this and they were describing the plot, and then there was lots of meanwhile this is happening, and I thought that it's a very meanwhile plot. It's sort of we go to see something and then meanwhile somewhere else this is happening, and it took me a while to get a read on, certainly on his character, because I couldn't work out, am I meant to be sympathetic with him because he wasn't struggling, he just gets what he wants, or is there meant to be some kind of I don't know, slightly more threatening tone to his actions? It was hard for me to kind of gauge how I was meant to be interpreting it.
Yeah, he just makes things happen, and everything works out for him, like in his personal life, with his mum, with his inventions. Like, it's kind of like, I kind of enjoyed that. I was like, it's just nice to see someone having a nice time, because he's just providing, like, to me, this whole book kind of felt like an opportunity to see how a society we're already very familiar with functions and changes with this new invention. Like, it's kind of like a treat for having read all the other books and been familiar with it, to just see a hypothetical situation play out while all of the characters you love sort of dip in and out for their moments and their cameo. And it's complications be damned. Like, I know there's this, and then every so often this extremely heavy, like, far right subplot comes in where there'll be just a bunch of murders, and then it's like, and now we're building houses by the train station, and wouldn't it be nice if there was a dining cart, and then murders and death and carnage and massacre, and then like, so tonally I found that a bit much to deal with, but I was enjoying it so much that I didn't really mind about the sort of the bumpy coach ride that the plot is actually.
There's a couple of things that even this start kind of felt like it's setting up to me. One is, that it's a nice, gentle ride. You know, you're going on the scenic railway of Discworld in this book, rather than the usual, which is more like an exciting roller coaster. But I think for me, it does feel, and look, you know, a lot of people have said this, even in the biography of Pratchett, this was the one book where they were like, we just don't feel like this one came together how we would have liked. And I can kind of see that. And it's still enjoyable to read, but it's very different, because Pratchett's plots are usually quite tight. Like, there's something driving people forward, and there's some sort of central conflict going on. If not, you know, like about forces in the world, then people internally. Like, in previous books, the equivalent of Dick Simnel making the train, you know, in something like Moving Pictures or something, there's something sinister about it, like you were saying, Liz. And here there's none of that. There's something a bit slightly strange and mysterious, which comes in fairly early, but it doesn't necessarily seem sinister except in a couple of scenes. And that's less about Dick and more about the train that he has built, Iron Girder. So there's a definite difference there. And then, there's some thematic kind of link between those two plots you were talking about, but it's not necessarily as strong as it could be. And I guess I'm kind of getting some of my criticisms out up the top here, because I did have fun reading this book, but I also found that I wasn't propelled through it. Kind of like you were saying, Craig, it doesn't have that propulsion. And I had to kind of, you know, I had to come back to it. I really it kind of wanted to be a book that rather than, you know, sit up reading late at night to see what happens next, it's kind of, you just open it up every few days and see what the next bit is for funsies. I don't know if this is the right word to use. It felt like a more casual kind of read. And I know it's been a comfort read to some of our listeners, and I can see why.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's just a nice place to hang out in between all the horrifying murders and massacres. But like the bits in between that, it's just nice to be in there. And I'll say up top as well, like I don't think it was like the other books necessarily, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can see this one as one that I revisit more than other books, perhaps because it is so stuffed with just world building detail, or not world building detail, just like world detail that it's a joy to just spend time in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just pick up a random part of the book and spend time there.
Mm. Yeah, like I think, I mean, I don't know, there were bits that reminded me of, like I guess plotty bits that reminded me of a lot of other ones. Usually there's some new technological invention that's arrived, and then we're seeing the effects of that on the world. But it's almost like in all the previous ones, I mean, you look at, I don't know, Men-at-Arms, you look at moving pictures and so on, there's this kind of dark undercurrent to whatever this new thing is, and we need to be kind of careful and wary about it because it then corrupts the people around it. But this seemed it was more like, no, this is a new thing and everybody kind of get on board, quite literally.
Yeah.
Didn't mean that one. But I don't know, I guess I was expecting it almost to take a turn at a certain point, but then it didn't. It was just like, no, it's more about everybody, I guess, moving with the times rather than resisting it.
Mm. Except for the group that is very definitely resisting it. Yeah.
Mm.
And I think that's the main thematic thing here is the story of the train is thematically and culturally, it's about progress. It's about the future. It's about a better life for everyone. I mean, we don't really touch on any of I think it is a very English story of trains. Like it doesn't really talk about any of the stuff that happens, say, in America with the establishment of railways there. Even though there are a couple of parallels with the way people were, attacked while building trains there. But yeah, it is very much that story of this was the next evolution in our glorious history kind of feel. And then you've got, there's people opposing it who are just clearly wrong. Like there's nothing sympathetic about the villains in this book. But we're talking about Dick getting what he wants. The first thing that he wants to do is get more money because he uses up all that initial pirate gold, building a full-size prototype engine which can actually move around on rails. And he takes it to Ankh-Morpork to see Harry King, the king of piss, or the king of shit, as he calls himself, straight up in this book. And I'm like, yeah, embrace it, buddy. But he's already having second thoughts. He's like, oh, I wish I had a more respectable kind of thing to do. Like his wife, who he calls the Duchess, is like, she wants to be all fancy and I want to, be fancy for her. And we still have to deal with the fact that my money is all made by dealing with the grossest stuff possible. If only there was a more manly pursuit I could have. And then Dick turns up and says, hey, look what I've got. Do you want to finance this? And he's like, yeah. But when they sign the contract for doing this deal, they introduce one of my favorite, sort of very minor characters in the book, Mr. Thunderbolt, the troll lawyer, who I quite enjoyed.
He was good. Yeah, he's was a nephew in the complex meaning of that term of like the king of trolls.
So he's part diamond, yeah.
Well, he's all diamond, isn't he? He's diamond through and through, but he doesn't. I don't think he looks the same. But I don't know what diamond looks like when it's being mined. So
yeah, well, he doesn't seem. He does wear a suit, but maybe that's because he's made of. I got the impression he was like diamond on the inside, but something else on the outside.
Maybe.
So he's mostly diamond, but also a bit of something else.
There's a line.
I think there was an early description about him, and there was something visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's veins of diamond that you can see. But there's a lot of interesting, conflicting, potentially ideas about the nature of people and whether that's important in this book. Because sometimes it is, like in this case with Mr. Thunderbolt, it's really important that he's a diamond troll and descended from Mr. Shine, the Diamond King of Trolls, because that means he can't lie. He's very trustworthy as a lawyer. And then at other times in the book, it's very important that we realize that it doesn't actually matter. That stuff doesn't matter. It matters who you are and what you do and whether you're accepted by other people.
Yeah. And I think because, he comments on how he's much more articulate, both literally and in his vocabulary because of that sort of
it says
diamond quality to him.
The voice was the voice of a professor, but one who had chosen to speak in an echoing cave. The features were more or less like those of all trolls, unless you looked for the giveaway signs and recognized the careful masonry work, the richness of the plant life in the visible cavities, and not least the elusive shine and possible shimmer, which caught the light so delicately, not boldly in your face, but irresistibly there. And he says, and yes, I am diamond through and through, and therefore I cannot tell lies for fear of shattering.
Yeah.
So
it's
yeah.
a little ambiguous maybe, but that's all right. I like that. We get to imagine this troll in different ways. But he's also a real symbol, like many of the characters who show up and a lot of the cameos and little new characters, of the progress that the Discworld is seeing and how it's not just technological change, it's social change as well. And the kind of traditional roles for various species in Ankh-Morpork are really changing because we have a troll lawyer. Later on, there's a troll hairdresser. There's a great gag later on where they're going to accept a troll into the new railway academy and they're going to train him to be a surveyor. And they're like, yeah, why not? Wouldn't it be great to have a surveyor who could lift up a mountain to see what's underneath? Which I thought was one of my favorite lines in the book. So yeah, trolls become this kind of symbol of we're doing all right. And then the dwarfs, who had previously been the symbol of, hey, this is the new face of Ankh-Morpork. We don't see very much of the modern dwarfs in Ankh-Morpork at all. We really only see the very traditional, basically fundamentalist is the way that they're depicted, delvers, the grags, who, previously been a villain in Thud, and even before that in the Fifth Elephant. They're kind of representing the opposite of that, which is like, we don't want any of this new stuff. In fact, we don't want it. We want to destroy it. We want to get rid of it.
Yeah, I do. And I guess because Fifth Elephant is one that I would happily reread a lot. And to me, this felt like, okay, it's nice that there's a continuation of it. It's not like it's one and done and, we've resolved that kind of fundamentalist aspect. But at the same point, it also did feel like, are we now typecasting the dwarves as the ones who are more prone to this kind of behavior? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of lines like that in the book where they say like two dwarfs is a conversation with three dwarfs is an argument, or, stuff like that where it's seen as somehow part of dwarf nature. And then at the same time, I mean, it feels like they're trying to drag dwarfs into the future, but I think one of the things that was weird for me is there's no contrast. Like the only, quote unquote good dwarfs that you see really anything of are the king and the king's closest advisors. Cheery's in it, but only like a tiny amount. And we don't see any of the other dwarf characters that we know. Not that there's a lot of actually major dwarf characters in Discworld now that I think about it, but they're the only like good dwarfs that we see. And then we never really spend any time with the dwarfs in Ankh-Morpork. We just hear about how there's lots of them. And, everyone in Schmaltzberg and in Bionk is leaving. Like all the dwarfs are going to Ankh-Morpork who don't like the old ways because there's no room for them there. And you're like, well, yeah.
It's like throughout the book, there's kind of an interesting musing on assimilation versus your own species as well. Like there's that bit where it throws back to, I've forgotten his name, but Feeney, the policeman who's now working with a goblin, and it talks about, is he like losing his goblin nature and becoming too much like us? And it's interesting that like the villainous, like the complication in this book is the fact that dwarves all disagree with one another. Like this whole like 2 is an argument, 3 is a war, and they all have factions and they don't all listen to their king. Unlike the trolls, who their king says something, they all do it. And that's great so long as the king is saying something that's not hugely objectionable. But if the king was like very aggressive and saying, we got to fight the dwarves again, we got to go back to the mountains, would they all do that as well? And it's being a homogenous, unified force under one person's rule is not necessarily a good thing, but in this book it kind of is presented like that, because Vetinari isn't even really, like, he says he's a tyrant, but he's the kind of tyrant who bends public will to go in the right direction. He's not just saying the thing and assuming everyone's going to comply. He works very hard to make sure a lot of elements are balanced, and that's not what's going on with these things. So it's like, what's the message here? Is it that it's good to assimilate, that it's bad to assimilate, it's good to disagree, it's good to all just fall into line? Like, maybe there isn't a message, it's just presenting different options. But throughout the story of this, because the complication is dwarves are fighting too much and they won't just listen to their king, that kind of, like, the ideas bat against each other a bit for me.
Yeah, that passage stood out as well to me, just because at that point I'm then unsure, is there a unifying kind of theme that's been put together here, or is it, I don't know, is Pratchett conflicted and he doesn't really know, and he's he's just raising the question, is something being lost here, but he doesn't know what that is and doesn't know whether he agrees with it or not. I don't know. But it definitely stood out.
Because he's in it for such a brief time, but it did pack a punch.
I kind of felt like more than maybe any other Discworld book, whoever reads this can kind of take away whatever message they want from it, because it has so many things going on and presents a lot of situations and a lot of kind of vague, vague's the wrong word, but kind of general commentary on things that doesn't take a definitive stance in any particular direction in a way that some of his other books do. I mean, I think he's always a little bit careful. It's something I think about a lot, but I think he always is a little bit careful not to push any of his sort of humanitarian ideas too far into the political realm. And he always tries to couch things in, this is just common sense, or this is just like, what will work for the most people, without it feeling too much like it's, somewhere on the real world political spectrum. And I think that's probably a conscious decision not to alienate any of his readers. But I think that also comes with a danger that maybe some people take away a message that's opposite to what you intend. And I think that is amplified in this book, where the messages are much less clear and can go in a lot of different directions. But look, the train also goes in a lot of different directions, but not immediately, because there's a lot of work to be done. And you were talking about Vetinari sort of steering public opinion, Liz. I think what's interesting in this book is that he doesn't really do that. Instead, he sort of looks to see which way the public opinion is going and then decides if he's going to support that or not. So when the train starts to become public knowledge at the start, just because it's in Harry King's compound going around in a circle, people go to see it. And almost immediately there are train spotters. I think the first one shows up like 30 pages into the book or something.
And writes one in his notebook. It's just so good.
One. Yeah, it's very silly. But it immediately fascinates a whole bunch of people, including Drumknot, Vetinari's assistant, and a whole bunch of goblins. They love it. I was waiting for Stanley to show up from the post office, and we never saw him, which I was disappointed by. I'm like, surely he's going to be a train spotter. He was into pins, he's into stamps. This is the trifecta, right?
He's probably setting up the magazine like in the background. We just don't get a chance to see it.
That's true. There'll be commemorative train stamps for sure. It's a very popular stamp theme. But yeah, it's all going pretty well. And Vetinari decides, okay, this seems pretty good, but I'm going to get Moist in because, like the blurb says, I need someone to be my eyes and ears, basically. And the government needs to have some sort of say in what this is, because it's clearly going to be a big deal. And also there needs to be somebody kind of overseeing the whole operation who's not just Harry King and his business interests, or Dick Simnel and his enthusiasm for making the thing. And so he kind of appoints him to be does he, later on in the book, he realizes, there's a bit where he says he realizes he's become Mr. Railway, but I don't know that he ever gets given an official title or position.
Or even a fancy hat. Like, he sort of gets a hat, but not in the traditional Moist hat way.
In fact, he does the opposite. He says he leaves the fancy suits and the cool hats at home and just dresses at one point like an engineer with a flat cap and sensible boots. I'd like to talk about Moist's involvement in this book, because it doesn't feel quite the same as the previous two books, where he's put into a high pressure situation. And there's even a line in this where later on in the book where there is a more, sort of immediate danger or difficulty, where he said, the king says to him, can you deal with pressure? And he says, pressure is where I start. And you're like, okay, great. That's a nice line. But in those other books, he's thrown in the deep end of a post office, which is totally failing, and there's magical business going on, and there's someone trying to burn it down to avoid undermining the superiority of the clacks system. And then there's a whole thing going on with the clacks system as well. Then in Making Money, he's in this sort of situation where he's got assassins coming after him, and he's got to do something to turn this around before it all goes to hell, because there's an actual villain moving against him, although the villain's a bit incompetent, but in a dangerous way. And here, it's just like, well, could be a bit of a mess if you don't do something about it.
I think part of the thing is it's not really a Moist book in the same way it's not really anyone's book, because it's just a who's who of our faves coming by and doing what they do best. So while he's in it a lot, it's not his book, and it's not Dick Simnel's book, so we can't really have like the people coming after him in the same way we do when it's like going postal or Making Money, because that would take up too much plot space that's not available. Like, I'm sure there's a way into it. Like, they could have made it someone's book, but yeah, I think because the protagonist is so split, we lose a little bit of that from the background to make way for more people.
Yeah, I think that was my feeling as well. Like, I wanted a central protagonist. I wanted someone for the novel to hinge around, and maybe that would have given it that kind of sharpness and tension that wasn't there. Because when he is there, he's kind of facilitating and greasing the wheels of things to keep it moving, but it never, similar to like Dick Simnel getting what he wants, it goes according to plan for the most part.
He drinks with the fancy old man. So that's the thing. I think a few podcasts back, I was like, I remember this scene where Moist is like drinking, but he's got these plastic things and he's got this system. I can't remember where I read it from. And I think you were like, oh no, that's from Raising Steam, because as I've mentioned before, this is the one that I was reading when I found out that Terry Pratchett died. So I still had my bookmark in there from where I just stopped reading it, because like at that stage I was sleeping in a loft bed and I would just put the book that I was reading next to me and fall asleep. And I woke up, did the doom scroll as one does of a morning, which is great for your mental health. Couldn't recommend it more. And found out that Terry Pratchett had died, and I just didn't pick it up again. Like I didn't sort of make a decision to stop reading it. It just sort of wasn't something I wanted to face or finish. And so my bookmark was still in there from then. And I had read, when I got it back up to that point, it was like just a few pages past that. And I was like, that's why it was fresh in my mind, but not consolidated. So I hadn't associated with this book because this book was unfinished for me. So, but it was, my point there being that bit was like a classic Moist bit. And I was like, oh great, we're away now. It's going to be like this thing. But then it just cuts away to something else.
Yeah. Unlike in the other Moist books where he's constantly coming up with clever schemes to get out of difficulty, and he kind of like, he digs himself into a hole, but then digs himself out again. I think that's one of the joys of those first two Moist books is like, he's got a problem to solve, and the way that he solves it gets himself into more trouble, which he's then excited about getting out of, because that's kind of how he lives, you know, by the seat of his pants. And he talks about living that way here. But a lot of what he does is very boring, and a huge amount of time passes in this book.
Yeah, so much, like years.
Yeah, just well, I don't think it's
a year
quite
and a
years,
half?
but it's at least, yeah, I think it's maybe at least a year. Certainly months. There's like a couple of pages where it just says months later. You know, it doesn't say months later, but it kind of implies it's been months that he's been out on the road doing things. But a lot of the book is, or at least a lot of what he does during the book, we don't follow him for every part of it, is just riding back and forth across the Stowe Plains, negotiating land deals for the railway and dealing with little problems.
He has dinner with his wife. He sort of talks to his butler. And I was like, oh, it's kind of like when Vimes was in his rut and setting up all of those traps for the assassins and things, but we don't even really get that. And again, that's sounding like complaints. It's just like, I don't mind. I'm kind of like, it's kind of like when all of the exciting thing in a television show happens in the penultimate episode, and then you get the episode of everyone just having a nice time dealing with things afterwards, which is always controversial, but I like, because I'm like, we've spent a lot of time with these characters, and I'm happy to just see that they're doing okay and they're having a nice time and they're living their lives. So I'm fine with that, even though if I wanted a tighter book, I think we needed a protagonist rather than glimpses into lots of our faves. But would I trade this book for that book? I don't think so.
That's fair. Do you think Moist would be the right protagonist if it was written more with a full protagonist on, or would you think it needed to be a new character?
So yes, I would love another Moist book, and I think this one could absolutely be it, because it's another big change to the city. But Harry King, to me, was the thing that I loved most about this book. We got to see so much more of him than we have previously. Like, we got a lot more insight into his life, his family, and it was an absolute joy to see him like go off on that mission to the swamps, like in Quorum and all of that stuff. So if Harry King could have somehow been the protagonist of this one, and we got even more of him, I think that's what I would have wanted.
Yeah, I reckon if you started with him, with that dream of, this is my life, is this the sum total of it? I want my legacy to be something else. And then what is that going to be? And then he sees the potential in the train. That gives it something, I think. Particularly where he ends up. I think it really gives the novel a kind of sharpness.
One of the things that occurred to me is that all of the people who are driving this plot are fabulously successful and wealthy. Moist is in a position of high privilege. He's running several of the most important institutions in the city. He lives in a big fancy mansion.
His wife's running the other thing that's very important as well.
His wife's running the other one, that's right, and making even more money than he is. Harry King is, of course, like the most wealthy man in Ankh-Morpork. Vetinari running the whole place. Like, Dick Simnel comes along new, but he starts with like a whole bunch of gold. Like, he's not destitute. All of these protagonists, more or less, are privileged, successful people. Like, they're not fighting to succeed. And I think this is, it's something we see with Vimes as well, is that by the later books, he's up in these echelons. And so you need like these kind of highly political, big scale crimes to kind of challenge him, because then it's not just about can he catch the villain with his resources. It's like, well, can he do it without causing a diplomatic incident? Like, it has to add that extra element. And here, I don't know if we have that. Like, it's really about very rich people making a thing that's going to make them more money if you look at it through one lens. And I wonder if that sucks a bit of what we're missing out of the book.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, particularly with Vimes, and I reckon, there was so much mileage in Vimes as a character because of where he starts and where he arrives at. There's always still that contrast that whilst he ends up in this extremely sort of privileged position with all these people who are extremely powerful, extremely wealthy, he doesn't fit in. He didn't come from that. He doesn't belong with them. And so he kind of cuts through and doesn't tolerate with the way they see the world. And I don't know if I got that same sense with Moist in terms of, who was he before all of this? It's more he's thrust into it, and then he is just that, for the books that he's around. He is struggling, but I don't have a sense of that trajectory as much for him as a character. And so then when he is in this privileged position, it's like, okay, well, is there more of an arc for him? Is there more for him to grow or to do here? Or is he has he reached his character kind of potential?
You know what occurs to me? Should we have had a goblin protagonist for this book?
I feel like it's too soon after like the goblin focus of the previous one. I would have loved to see a goblin protagonist, but maybe not for this story. It's a good question, but I was immediately like, no goblin protagonist. No, I don't want it. But I feel like it's just, we just had that kind of, like, he wasn't the protagonist, but she wasn't the protagonist. I'm getting my goblins and my orcs confused. I'm sorry, but yeah, which is terrible. I guess I would just cancel myself now, but yeah.
No, that's all right. Well, let's get through a bit more of the plot to see where we get to, because I feel like this is kind of how it's going to be with this book, is that the plot kind of just, like you said, Craig, it kind of just happens in a way. And I mean, the thing that distinguishes plot from just a series of events is that in a plot, you understand why each part of it happens. Like, each thing that happens causes the next thing to happen, or at least strongly influences the next thing that happens. This is a really important concept of narrative writing. And I think it's usually so strong in Pratchett that even though here, logically, what happens flows from one thing to the next, the dramatic logic and the narrative logic that you normally get with Pratchett, where things are exciting as they happen and you have these ups and downs. This is something that Kurt Vonnegut talked about. You don't just want a plot that goes in a straight line. You've got to have these ups and downs between whatever the kind of states of your book is. He used an example of like agony and ecstasy, like, are you having a really awful time? Then you need to have like some positive things happen to you, and then you need to have a really bad time. And those things happen in this book, but not to the same people. We kind of cut to someone else having a bad time. So I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked from the plot again, but this is kind of the
you can't get sidetracked from the plot. It's fine.
I'm on rails. I can't go off. But anyway, so Dick is getting money to make the railway. Moist is appointed to represent the city in these negotiations and make sure oversee the whole thing, basically. And they decide they're going to build the first permanent railway. And I think one of the things I really missed is, like, unlike in moving pictures or even in like going postal, there was like a Discworld version of the story of why things are called the things they are, or they have weird alternate names. And here we just have all the regular train names, and they just come with the steam train. Like, they come as a package. Like, we're going to call it a railway. We're going to call it a terminus. We're going to call it a spur or a whatever the other names are. Like, it uses all the train terminology, which I guess would be weird if they didn't, because that's why you come to a book about trains. But also I kind of missed, but how are they going to come up with weird punny ways to name these things? They don't. But they build the first one to Stolat, which is where Dick's original workshop is, so he can keep working there. And this is where we kind of get the first sort of meanwhile, because this is where we are finding out that the grags, the kind of heads of not the dwarf religion, because they don't see it as a religion, but their sort of very traditional way of life of dwarfs, they are once again trying to wind back progress in dwarf society. And it escalates to the point where they are assaulting modern dwarfs who come back to Uberwald to visit family. There's a little scene of that. And they have started attacking and even burning down clacks towers and injuring clacks workers and goblins. And this is causing a lot of problems for the Low King, Rhys Rhysson. And he tries to put an end to it. He sort of says, all right, hey, cool it. I'm the king, and this is not what we're about. And they kind of pretend like, okay, yes, my king, we'll do that. But instead, Ardent, who's the leader of this faction, and his followers kind of go underground. They kind of keep working on this in secret.
As it were.
Sowing. Yeah, so, as it were. They're dwarfs. They live underground already. But they sort of secretly sort of sow dissent by spreading rumors and distrust and recruit dwarfs to their cause, often by lying to them or even outright threatening them or their families, and recruiting people through that. So they're using very obviously nasty tactics to convince dwarfs who may be a little bit traditional to go all the way in joining them.
I caveat this with, I love this book, and I'm glad it exists, but I did kind of get whiplash between it's nice, we're building the railway, we're murdering a mixed race bride at a wedding, like doing a whole Kill Bill thing, and now we're back to having a nice time doing this. Goblins have torn a dwarf like ear to ear, and like there was sort of like extreme moments of violence that we kind of like trundled past. I feel like the only time we really got to sit with like the horror was the massacre scene later. Because he built up this really beautiful like Lamidos scene where dwarves and humans are living in harmony side by side. Everyone's almost the same height, but all they care about is mining. There's a wedding happening between a dwarf and a human, and these grags and their followers come in. Only two die, but one is the bride, and it's just very upsetting. And then it stops. And I know that at the end of the book, there's a nice homage played to her, like it's shown that obviously like Rhys Rhysson cares, and that hasn't gone by unnoticed. But plot-wise, it is a bit of whiplash. Like sometimes that's on purpose, and it might be here, but I don't feel like it works as well as it might. Like I don't think it's for shock value. I think it's just a pacing issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about this. I don't know. I mean, sorry, and this could go into another side rail. But the books will often begin with these sort of like a collection of scenes that will jump around, and it's all kind of scene setting before we then, lock into a sort of protagonist and what the kind of the main thrust of the story is. And it really kind of works because all these little elements, you can then dip back into them later and they kind of feed the overall narrative. But it kind of felt like you never got out of that mode. And so we were just constantly kind of just zipping around. And I guess it was, I don't know, a lot of people have litigated one way or the other this sort of little scene-by-scene or episodic style of his rather than sort of a chapter-driven format to his novels. And typically it doesn't faze me, and I quite like it because it does just keep you going. It keeps you reading. But I felt like this, I don't know, I wanted a more kind of grounding structure to it, just so I knew where I was, and were these little scenes then connected to an overall whole that, was building somewhere. Rather than just this sort of slightly unshapely, we're going here and then we're going there and then we're going there, and no sense of what the big picture was.
And that's another thing that makes it feel not like a Moist book, is that the first two Moist books are the only Discworld books written with chapters. Because he's sort of adopting that style that seems to suit Moist's adventures. And, look, I have seen talk from people who've read this book and they feel like maybe in some ways it's emulating certain stories like that were written about the railways, and there's kind of a kind of prose there. And I think the prose is fine in this book. Like I think the writing is quite good in places, right? It's more the plotting and the pacing that I feel makes it feel a bit off. I think you're right there. I mean, if you've ever read, and we've read them all for the podcast, but if you read the Long Earth books, the sci-fi ones that you wrote, they're like the extreme end of that kind of, let's have lots of little scenes at the start that kind of seed everything, and they'll all pay off during the book. Although not all of them do, but most of them do, right? They set up
Long
stuff that's
war,
important
looking
later.
at you. Like, ugh.
But in this one, they do keep happening throughout. And sometimes they're quite delightful. Like they're just sort of like a little consequence. Like I'm thinking I'm leaping far ahead here, but I feel like we're just kind of abandoning going through the plot in detail. There's a bit later on where they get help from some gnomes to refill the water on the train during its final important journey at the end of the book. And they get some water from a nearby, they don't say where. But then there's like a little scene afterwards where there's a fisherman who is fishing and then the lake just drains of water and then it fills back up again. And it's clearly something to do with the gnomes. The exact reason why that happens is not entirely clear, but okay, that's a fun little weird scene. I don't know that we needed it, but okay, sure. And there's so many of those things as well as the horribleness that you're talking about, Liz.
Actually, while we're on very specific things that I'm not sure we needed it, but it was kind of interesting. The kitten torture in a footnote. Can someone explain to me how that works? Like, what's the element? Because I know, like, you're in an Iron Maiden and there's a bunch of kittens and there's like a slat where you can slide in like a bowl of cream, and then if a kitten is unhappy, he hits you with a thing, right? But like, I still don't quite understand, like, what's making the kitten unhappy, or is it just that cats are inherently yowly?
Well, I kind of assumed that you had to sit very still because it's still an Iron Maiden. It's got spikes on the inside, right? So if you're covered in kittens and you move the wrong way, you're going to impale a kitten.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's like, be nice to the kittens, otherwise we're going to hurt you.
And also, you're responsible for potentially murdering a bunch of kittens. We've put you in this situation. So you have to, like, I feel like that's the torture, is like, you're covered in these cats and you could accidentally kill one at any moment. That's your torture. Like, it feels like something that would happen to you in hell, you know?
Yeah. All right. I feel like I have a better understanding of that too, because I spent way too long sitting there being like, what is happening?
I think that's reasonable. It's not entirely clear.
Wasn't it one, I'm trying to remember which book it was, with there's something going on at the watch house and they're threatening someone with some potential torture. And
the ginger beer?
Yeah.
Ginger beer treat.
And then you can hear it next door and they're shaking it up and yeah.
Yeah, but they don't actually do it. Yeah, so there's an element of that too, I think. But it's not quite clear if you're meant to take it very literally or if it's a potential threat that's the problem. But that's how I thought of it. I'm like, I don't want to be in an Iron Maiden. I think the fact that he doesn't remind you that an Iron Maiden has spikes on the inside is maybe a detail that might have helped make that clear.
See, I did know that because of a Dennis Wheatley story I was told as a child, which is way too young to be told a Dennis Wheatley story, but fine. The thing I don't know for sure about Iron Maidens is, are the spikes all the way through, or is there a rim that means you have to stay very still? Because I thought the idea was that it makes sure that you're dead when it's closed. So that's why I was kind of like, but if you watch Sleepy Hollow, like, it's unclear whether it's like partially pierces you. Anyway, I will look into how an Iron Maiden works, and then we may or may not put it into the notes, depending on how horrifying it is.
Depending on how awful it is. Yeah. That's a fair call.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these grags are causing many horrible things to happen. Meanwhile, the railway goes on. They're going to build a permanent railway, is the phrase they use. Or the permanent way, I think, is the other way that they kind of describe it, and then it gets called a railway. But Moist's main job, this is the bit where he starts riding around the place, mostly in the Stowe Plains, negotiating to buy up bits of land so they can build the railway on it. And that goes pretty well, but this is where he starts having all those dinners with rich old men and drinking with them because they think they're going to get him drunk and get one over on him. But he's only pretending to drink. Something that really happened during Prohibition in the US, I found out in my reading up on this. There was at least one, I don't know if they were an FBI agent, but whoever was looking into people drinking when they shouldn't have been during the Prohibition, there was at least one agent who had like a device like this where they would be pretending to drink by emptying the alcohol into these bladders that they secreted about their person. And then they also used it as evidence. Like, look, here's all the alcohol that they plied me with, which is horrible, but also ingenious. But yeah, so that was based on a real thing, like so many things in Pratchett books are. But yeah, he buys up all this land, negotiates it, and they start to build the first proper railway line, and they open it once it gets to Stolat, and they build the station. They open it, and they call it the Ankh-Morpork and Stowe Plains Hygienic Railway, which is just explained in a footnote why the hygienic is there, because this is Harry King's wife's, Effie's main contribution. Is she's very concerned that it be hygienic and clean and nice for everyone to travel on, including all of the ladies who get their own carriage.
And waiting room. Well, actually, Yeah, the
Or is
single
it
ladies get
their
their
own
own
waiting
waiting room as well.
Mm.
They get their own carriage, their own waiting room, and men and families have the other waiting room. She actually, like, Effie as like a background character, I thoroughly enjoyed her contributions because, like, while she's not like physically in it a lot, like her presence is felt wherever you can. Like, I particularly like the thing that Harry had to like hold her back from putting a bidet on the quorum train. I was like, let her do it. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he really made a good case as to why not to put one on there. I presume it was the expense, but also maybe it would have diluted the
his product
that he was
yeah.
collecting in the big system to sell off. Yeah. But this is where one of the first bits of action happens too during this part. So not long after the first railway opens, Moist is just walking around the compound where they're doing all the work in Ankh-Morpork, and he sees two kids on the line and is like, no, and he runs towards them and he tackles them and he manages to save them by grabbing them and rolling under the railway, like so they're not across the tracks.
Which we don't find out till later. Like, they sort of dripped that information out to us, like, which I thought was done very well.
Yeah, it was exciting, but also, it came out of nowhere. And I think that's the other thing that's a little bit weird about this book is that usually Pratchett is a master of setting things up. Like I often talk about how he's written the books a bit like a stand-up comedy set, right? In that he's doing setup and payoff, sometimes hundreds of pages apart. But in this book, there's a lot of stuff that just happens without any kind of preamble or setup earlier in the book. Like we don't know why there are kids listening to the railway tracks. It just happens. Like there's no, and then Moist saves them, averting a disaster for the railway line. But it's then the catalyst for him to go to Harry King, who's upset about this because we find out he's a big softy at heart and just forces him saying, you got to clean up your act. You got to like pay people more. You got to have security. You got to have guards. You got to have rails. You got rails. So you got to have fences, right? And he just does it. And there's no other real consequence to it. It just felt like, it wasn't set up and it wasn't a big payoff either. It was just sort of this exciting moment.
I do wonder if like that kind of thing, that kind of setup and payoff comes more in the editing process. And it does, like, I guess it just does have a bit of that feel in the writing that it's coming out in a kind of fluent way, but doesn't then have that sort of, let's sit back and pull it apart and put it back together again and then, make this work as a whole novel.
Yeah, they don't go into a lot of detail in the biography, but from memory, the way it's described is that there was a lot of writing of specific scenes, but there wasn't a lot of that connective tissue or the overall plan. And I mean, the way that Pratchett described writing a plot was the Valley of Mist, which we've talked about on the show before, which is that he sort of imagines where he wants to be on the other side of this valley. And it's full of mist, so you can't really see how to get there, but you can see these kind of bigger trees that are like landmarks that he wants to get to. So he just sort of aims towards that and figures it out. But this feels kind of like there were lots of trees that weren't that big a landmark. So he was able to write all of those bits and I mean, again, it's just not that it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't feel, there's not, the term that I would use is narrative design because that's how I talk about it when I teach it. And it feels like there's less narrative design here. There's plenty of good prose writing. There is a story that happens, but yeah, we don't have those ups and downs like I was talking about before, and we don't have that setup and payoff in the same way that really marks him as a master storyteller in a lot of the other books.
He was writing by dictation at this point, wasn't he? Yeah.
And it's a different way of thinking, like to change the way that you write, like if you're used to a certain way, like of course, like things are going to come out differently, I reckon. Yeah.
Yeah. But he'd been doing that for a while before this. I think Snuff was certainly written that way, I think, and possibly a book or two before that, maybe Unseen Academicals. Like this wasn't the first one, but I think, look, there's a lot of, you don't want to lay the foot at anything in particular, but I think it's probably unavoidable to talk about the fact that this is towards the end of his life, and his Alzheimer's was definitely affecting the way that he was able to do things. And I think it's pretty clear this is probably was a much rougher process than he would have liked. The fact that with that all going on, he still wrote this book is quite phenomenal and a testament both to his skill and talent, but also to that of Rob Wilkins and his editors who were helping him do it at the time. And I think they pulled together something pretty good, even if we have criticisms.
Yeah, I think it's more like, rather than it's a failure or anything, it gives you an insight into what, if you almost like writing something where it's entirely, I don't know how to describe this, almost like a very subjective way of writing, where he can probably see it all in his head.
Mm.
And if he's verbalizing it, because he's dictating it, so he's giving you what he thinks is enough. But then for us, we're not inside his head, so we're not seeing some of the little, like the trees in the mist that he can see, that cement that into a wider world. So it just, there's just these odd moments where you're like, oh, that came out of nowhere, or why are we here now? It still works around that, but it's just, it feels much more like, okay, you're in, I don't know, you're listening to him telling you the story, I guess.
Mm.
And if he was there, you could then say, okay, well, what about this? Tell me more about that. But I guess that's not what's happening.
Mm.
Maybe what we'll do, we'll kind of talk about the rest of the plot into these big chunks, and then we'll sort of talk about the important bits that come out of that. So once they open the railway to Stolat, that's the start of the proper railway, and they make sure it's going to be safer. Vetinari, although he's interested in getting a train to Uberwald because he travels there to see Lady Margalotta and he hates going by coach, he says, okay, but first we should build a train to Quirm because they're our neighbor, and as established in a little vignette at the start of the book, people are really upset that their seafood always is spoiled, and all of the nice produce that's grown outside of Ankh-Morpork takes way too long to get here, and it's always too hot in the summer, and it's always a bit spoiled. So they want to build a line to Quirm, and Moist goes out to try and buy up the land to make this happen. But once he gets to the Quirm side of the border, because Quirm, like Ankh-Morpork, is a city-state, so there's the main city, and then there's kind of a surrounding state around it, which is all these sort of little duchies and kingdoms that kind of owe fealty to Quirm. They have different laws about secession, and this is based on the way that it really works in France, which is that instead of the inheritance going to the oldest child and they get all of the land, they parcel it up so every child gets a bit. And after many, many generations of this, there are all these very, very small bits of land, which makes it basically impossible for him to buy up enough land to build a railway because, as they put it in the book, you know, he would be buying up all of the land for some of these people just to build a railway on it. And so instead, on the advice of a local marquis, who's one of the more prominent guest characters, I quite like the Marquis de, my French pronunciation is terrible. Is it Ayon? Is that Pan? I don't know how to say it.
I haven't done French since year 2, so you're correct. I'm an authority, and you did it right.
Right. Well, he's a marquis, and he's great, and
he's married to an Ankh-Morporkian lady.
Yes, who's also great. Although she doesn't, kind of like Effie, she doesn't feature in the book much, but her presence is felt a little bit. But he advises that they could instead go through another thing called the Marquis, which is spelt differently, and I know about this because of Star Trek. Because this is real from the French resistance in World War II when the Nazis occupied France. They were called the Marquis because they hid in a region called the Marquis, which was this like barren wasteland kind of place where you couldn't easily go and find them.
There wasn't an Earl wasteland or, a king wasteland?
No, it was just called it's a different word. It's pronounced the same, but it's a different word. And they use this in Star Trek. There's a rebel group who oppose this truce with a power outside of the Federation. I won't go into the details. I'll put it in the show notes if you want to know. But if you've seen Deep Space Nine or Voyager, you know what I'm talking about. They're also in Next Generation. Anyway, that's a whole thing. But there is a Marquis, and it's kind of full of these lawless folks. So there's bandits in there, and there's goblins. And the goblins are described as Quirmian goblins. So they make wine out of snails, and they're very violent. But also they are horribly mistreated by the bandits that live there, which are the even worse problem in the Marquis. And so Moist is like, but your government owns this. So like they'd be happy for us to build through that. And he's like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, I'll sort it out. And so he sorts out these problems. The first one is he gets Harry King and a bunch of his heavies who do security at the railway to go in there, and they just beat the crap out of these bandits and then take them back to be arrested. And that's like problem solved. Like it wasn't hard. You just send us
briefly
in
the Expendables in the middle of the book. And
yeah.
Right.
And then they start building the line through it. And Moist is like, well, now we've got to sort out these goblins. What are we going to do about them? So he goes with Of the Twilight, the Darkness, who's the main goblin character in the book, who's kind of the de facto leader of the goblins who work for Adora Bell on the clacks. And as we find out later, is the goblin equivalent of a shaman called I don't know, how did you pronounce this word when he announces it? It's kind of spelt shamegog, but I assumed it would be pronounced shamagog or something like that. What did you think?
I gave up in my mind and just read it as a word without sound.
Fair enough. I can't do that.
Yeah, I think I went through the same process where I looked at it as Shangog and then thought it probably could be something else, but I don't know if it was just its own thing from then on.
It's a good word, though. I like it. But anyway, he's a Shamagog, as we find out later, but he helps Moist to talk to the Quirmian goblins,
who are very well dressed, even though they're wearing the traditional sort of bits and pieces where they talk about making all of the bits of animals and feathers and stuff look like haute couture as opposed to the Ankh-Morpork ones.
Yeah.
This is a good detail.
And this is sort of an interesting thing, right? It's on that continuum between should you assimilate or should you be your own person? Like there's kind of those questions in the book. But then these goblins are like the epitome of the thing in the middle, where it's like we're doing our own thing, but we're also influenced by the culture that we are technically living within. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I enjoyed that. It was very funny. And the fact that they make wine out of snails, I was like, this is great. That's a very French sounding
fruit
thing
of the walls.
Yeah. But sort of makes a impassioned speech to them on Moist's behalf. Basically says to them, hey, you're living in a shit place. All these bandits are always hassling you. Well, we've taken care of the bandits. And if you want a better life, we can give you a job. You should come with us. And there's this great bit of the Twilight Darkness is kind of like leading from behind. Like he's sort of making Moist look like the leader, but he's really doing all the work. And I kind of enjoyed that on some level. But this is where the violence kind of crosses back over into the main plot line because when they lead the goblins back to the railway workers' camp where they're building the line, they find they've all already been murdered by some of the Delver dwarfs.
And they're stacking horror on horror here because we've just found out that the bandits would eat the young of the goblins because when they'd be hungry, they'd be like, those are the easiest ones to catch. And so they have this scene where they're walking over all these bones as this group of like goblin refugees are trying to follow them back to safety. And then on that journey, they find this camp full of murdered railway workers. So it's horror on horror.
Yeah, it is horrifying. And they they deal with it with more violence. Like there's a lot of sort of straight up action in this book in a way that's a little bit different to some of the other books. But also similarly to the other books, it happens when people are really pushed to the limit. So just like sort of in Thud, when, Vimes is under the ground in Coombe Valley and he's kind of delirious because he's had all of these sort of horrible things happen to him and he's got the summoning dark in him. And he's been prevented from getting home to his son. He kind of goes, berserk and kills a bunch of dwarfs. We've got a similar kind of thing here where of the Twilight, the Darkness makes this potion and gives it to Moist.
No, an old goblin lady provides. Yeah.
You're right. It is.
He gets the potion later, but there is a lot of goblin amphetamines being given to Moist throughout this novel.
Yeah, they're drugged. I mean, they are the one who cook, obviously, the goblins. But they give him this potion that lets out his rage, and he leads the goblins into battle, and they slaughter these dwarfs in revenge, and then document what the dwarfs did, so that this can become public knowledge, which just escalates everything with the Low King. It's like, it's all going horribly wrong. It's not resolved as the king hoped it had been. Yeah,
and some of the goblins also die in the battle, and one thing that Moist does is make sure their bodies are treated the same as the humans who died, which some of the workers object to and are rewarded with presumably a punch to the nose because he comes away with the bleeding nose.
Yeah, he's kind of because Moist is presented at the start of the book as still being kind of dodgy on goblins, because even though if you were reading the books when they came out, as readers we've just been through a whole book where goblins are established as everyone treats them like vermin, but then we realize they're people, which is a whole part of the plot of Snuff. Moist wasn't there for that. Like presumably he went to see the concert that was given and is like, oh, okay. And then has kind of got the memo, but he still, and there's a couple of little hints that it's because when he was a kid in Uberwald, he read this book that showed scary goblins and it had a big effect on him. I'm like, get over it, buddy. And he does get over it in this book, but he takes a little while to warm up to them. But by this point, he's like, they're people. Come on, let's go. Treat them properly. And I do like that all of these goblins live in his house, like in the walls and in this massive mansion, because there's just the two of them. And there's all this empty space, but they still live in the walls and the attic and the basement and stuff. It's because that's where they like it.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool. I was like, I want goblins living in my house.
I don't, but I can see why one would.
Yeah. But that's sort of the big thing that happens is they establish the railway to Quirm, and that sort of really, really puts the railway. They keep using this phrase in the book, on the map, because they talk about, and I think this is a phrase from the history of the railway too, but, you know, when they build the railway to Quirm, of course they put stops at towns along the way because the train has to stop, and you can make more money if you can put off and pick up passengers in places where they want to go. And so that puts all these little towns on the map in ways that they wouldn't have been otherwise, because no one would go there if there wasn't a train station there. And I've lived in Australia. I've lived in towns that probably wouldn't exist if they didn't need to stop the train. Like Junee is a place like that. I lived there for a while. There's no reason to have a town there except that the train needed to stop. And then they built a prison there. And now that's the reason that it exists. But still, you know, let's not dwell on that. Yeah. So that's kind of the story of that first section. And then once this is sorted out, once there's a train line to Quirm, this is when Vetinari starts putting pressure on Moist to build the train line to Uberwald, which is a lot further away. It's going to take lots a lot more resources. Yeah, there's lots of hills, there's lots of mountains, there's lots of gorges and stuff. You got to build bridges. It's going to be a big job, and it's going to take months and months and months. And Vetinari's like, but you got to do it. And he takes this hard line with Moist. He says, I don't think you understand. What happens is I tell you what needs to be done, and you do it. I don't care how you do it. That's not my department. And you're like, okay, I see how this is going. And it's one of the few places actually that I wanted to bring up. There's a lot of ideas in this book that feel like they're coming out of the Science of Discworld books, particularly in the third or fourth one. I forget which one it was, but there's a really strong idea that one of the way, and I object to this way of thinking about it, but it's what's in the book. They talk about how the class structure is important because it kind of models what happens in military organization, where you have these sort of officers at the top who know what needs to be done and make the plans. And you have the sort of, your grunts at the bottom, your working class equivalent, who actually do the work. And then you have what they made a case for in the book, and I don't know how true this is, but that you need a middle class or the sergeants in the middle who actually organize the people at the bottom to do what the people at the top have said needs to happen. Mm-hmm. And they make the case in the book, one of the Science Discworld books, that they think this is integral to the future of humanity and progress, and that you couldn't do it any other way. I'm like, I don't know if that's true, but they kind of make that case. And I think there's a little bit of that happening in this book. And you see other little touches of the Science of Discworld stuff too. Like they talk about steam engine time, which is it's a concept from sci-fi writing, which is the idea that, at some point a bunch of authors all write a book about this same scientific concept. And it's because that concept's time has come. And in the same way, a whole bunch of people built steam engines around the same time, even though the technology and the understanding of steam had been around for hundreds or thousands even of years, because the conditions of the culture that they lived in were conducive to, we really want to go fast and we want to go further distances. And it's important to the way we're structuring our lives now. Maybe
what you were saying about the class system from Science Discworld, which I have purged from my memory, and I have absolutely no recollection of that part of it being, because I really didn't enjoy the later books. They have that in this one, like you were saying, even through the class system on the trains, because they have that whole conversation about how having the second class cabin makes it so that if you spend that extra £6 to take your girl on that one, you're like, actually, I could get used to this. You try harder at work, and therefore it just helps everyone overall if everyone is striving to be better. They have that. Maybe that ties in with what you were saying earlier, Ben, about this book being all a bunch of dudes who are at the top of their game, who have tons of money, striving to like that could tie in with that. Once you've gotten to there from the bottom or whatever, it's about the importance of the struggle. I'm not saying I agree with that, but if that's one of the themes of the book, having the people driving this book be people who've succeeded after starting from somewhere not the top, it ties in.
Which also mirrors Pratchett's own personal experience, right? He started out
no electricity.
Yeah, and writing for newspapers while also trying to write a book and trying to get it sold until, he hit upon the one that was a success and his career took off.
I did want to point out that I thoroughly enjoyed the playful, not scorn, but the cynical knowing wink towards newspapers that he had throughout the whole thing of how they'll include there's the tabloids in there, but even the Ankh-Morpork Times, he's just kind of got I can't remember the headline that's locals hate the train, probably, like as a subhead, like it's the kind of thing, like, and knowing that he has worked, and I said this during The Truth, knowing that he's worked at the newspaper and he's seen the inner runnings of it, it's just an extra joy of him sort of like doing a wink at his own industry.
Yeah, for sure. That's in there big time.
Where do you think like this ends up in terms of its feelings about class and the class system? Because obviously it's reflecting a lot, but I don't know. This was one I did feel like it was perhaps a bit too accepting of the inherent problems of the class system. That, again, maybe from a non-British point of view, it feels odd, but maybe it's, I don't know.
Because you even have have the town that's sprung up outside of Ankh-Morpork because it's become such a hub. Like, because early in the book, when Vetinari and Moist are going through there, he's talking about how he would have loved to be in on the scam in his previous life of getting these like estates for people who want to have a little bit more but are actually being ripped off. Like, the class system seems pretty ingrained and not critiqued in this one. I agree.
And the fact that I guess Harry ends up becoming a part of it, which is, I guess, good for him, but also it's kind of like, well, is that the natural progression of things that, you know?
Well, I think the thing for me was that it really does seem to accept that the new nobility is just the rich, right? It's the people who succeed under capitalism, which is what we see in, you know, the real world. But and I would have loved to see a bit more speculation on that side of things in my speculative fiction. Like I kind of get why it's not there. Like that's not what this book is about. But it also did feel like it was just making the Discworld more like the real world. And I see why some people are not interested in that. Like it's not a fantasy railway in the sense that it is fantastical in itself. It's got very little fantasy elements in it. It just feels like, oh, okay, well, there's no magic in this book. In fact, they refuse to talk to the wizards and get their help because they're doing it all with the slide rule and the numbers and the sine and the cosine and the tangent. The wizards play a very small part. They have like a couple of little cameos, but it does feel like it's just grafting the reality of our world onto Discworld in a way that I found slightly disappointing because I was like, surely this is a great opportunity to show how things could be different with the railway. But it immediately moves into, like, once they need more money to build the railway to Ubervold, where we're at in the plot right now, Moist comes up with the idea of selling shares in the company, which the way he talks about it sounds like it's not a thing that's been done before, although there are kind of similar ideas in making money. The thing that tickled me about that, though, is that it's such a big part of so many train board games. Like, some of them are just about building trains, but a lot of them are about building railways and also buying shares in various railway companies. In fact, there's a whole family of games that are all about that, both of those elements of, expanding the railway system. But it just feels very accepting of that, like you were saying, Craig, that in a way that I was, found a little disappointing.
But has it not always kind of been like that? Because, I mean, if we look at Vimes' storyline, he moves up the same ladder that all of these guys have, and he is disgruntled about having to go to the knobby events and things, but he sort of still exists within the structure and doesn't actively rail against it. So, like, Discworld has always just been a fantastical mirror to our real world. And I feel like it's consistent to not necessarily critique it. It's just sort of like, this is how it goes. If you succeed under capitalism, if you build the railway station, if you keep making money, this is how it's going to end up. And I do think that is consistent in the series.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess, like the police force in Ankh-Morpork is like a fantasy police force in the sense that it does what we all hope a police force would do. And it is about justice and about protecting people rather than, protecting property and modern understanding that we have of the problems with the police force. Maybe in this way, the railway is a fantasy railway in the sense that the real railway is fantasy. It is like a beautiful thing that everybody loves and did have a sort of near magical effect on the world. And, as people have pointed out when reading this book, all of these myths and stories sprung up around the railways when they were being created because people were so enamored with it and amazed by it. And it really did transform the way that people live their lives and think about the world around them. So maybe that's magic enough, and I'm wanting extra fantasy magic on top of real magic that is not necessary, kind of like they talk about in the book.
And while it's a mirror of a class system that I don't agree with, it's not necessarily an endorsement. It could be a fantasy version of that too, because in this version, all of the millionaires pretty much that we meet or who have power are good guys. Like Harry King, he shown throughout this book to be quietly philanthropic wherever he can be, actually decent. His wife cares. Like, and in other books where we've had the evil lords and stuff, they're usually the villains and they get stamped out. So in the Discworld, kind of like all the people rising to the top that we see, even if they're in the top class with all the fancy stuff, they're like the good versions of that. Like people reflect on now being like, why aren't, like, now we've got Elon Musk and all of those guys, but they talk about, and everyone always looks at the past with rose-colored glasses, but they're like, millionaires used to like start the library system and that kind of thing, and they don't do that anymore. It feels like it's reflecting that period of the top echelon of society, whether that actually truly existed in this way or not. It feels like it's more that version, like a fantasy version.
Yeah, I was wondering that as well, particularly with Musk, and whether reading this with an eye on when it was written and reflecting to some degree, whether intentionally or not, sort of, I guess, the discourse that was occurring at the time and the real things that were occurring at the time, and then whether reading it now, and particularly how we view, these kind of self-made, even though they're not self-made, people who are, at the forefront of, I guess, technological pursuits, and whether the story would have come out the same way, or whether there would have been more of a, actually, there's a danger here.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's because it's so closely modelled on the real history of the railway in the UK. At least, the history of how those things were built. But then, also you've got facets like Harry King is named a rail baron in this book, but there's no connection to all of the awful stuff that rail barons did in the US, fighting with each other and against the people who actually lived on that land before they built trains through it and destroyed their communities. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It is a rose-tinted idea of the past that is being translated into the Discworld, and maybe that's nice, but I think it feels like it takes an edge off what some of the Discworld is for. Or maybe, I don't know.
The thing I really did like, because this is, I hadn't read this, before this, and it's been a while since I've certainly read, it's been a long time since I've read a Pratchett book for the first time. I guess more than anything else and more than any other experience of reading his books, it was one where it struck me where, yes, this is a fantasy setting, but we're now dealing with the reality of the fantasy setting. And it's kind of like we can deal with all the magic and all the various things that occur, but at a certain point we need to just, what is the reality of this going to be? Like, how are we going to, get along and live as a people? How are we going to progress as a society? How are we going to move forward? How are we going to, get seafood into the city or whatever it might be? And it's kind of like, I don't know whether it's true or apocryphal, but that sort of George R. R. Martin quote about Tolkien, where he's like, well, what was Aragorn's taxation system going to be like? Like, it's all really nice to have this kind of fantasy story, but at some point, what are we going to do with it? And what is the real world of this going to be like? And I really did like that it was doing that. It was just, you're all here for the fantasy, because we've all read the, however many books that come before in the fantasy setting, but now we're going to tell you, I guess, how this really could occur. And then for us to then come back to our own life and, the things we do take for granted, like the train system or whatever, and just be able to see that in that history and that, okay, well, this is where we've come from. And once upon a time, the life before trains was kind of fantasy for us, and now we're here. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was, I guess, the kind of feeling I was getting as I was reading it.
No, that does.
Which I really liked.
That does make sense. And I think, part of the fantasy is also, it's not literally what happened in the real world. Like, it's mashed up. Like, the fact that what is the equivalent of Britain building trains has to build a train that goes into France. Well, that didn't happen when they were originally building steam trains, right? Because there was no Channel Tunnel in the 19th century. So here we have to imagine, well, what would happen there? And Pratchett's gone, well, the hereditary system they have in France would make that really a nightmare. So what are you going to do? Oh, I've got an answer for this from the history of World War II, of all things. And, so it's this interesting, like, I feel like I'm complaining about too much, but that is really cool because this, one of the things Pratchett does so well, he is still doing well in this book, which is taking stuff from our real history and mashing it up into new shapes to go, here's an alternate version of this with a little bit of, there's trolls and dwarfs and goblins on top. Yeah. And I think that should be enough for me. Shut up, Ben.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's always been the thing with him. Like, it's not like he just sits here and writes allegory where we go like, okay, there's a message for us to take away. But reading his books is so much like, I feel like I can now particularly when I was a kid reading this, I was like, I now understand the world around me better. Like, I've learned a bit more about these things, so I'm going to go and find out more. And, which by synthesizing all these real things into this kind of fantasy, which is, I guess one of the really amazing things about all these books.
Yeah. Well, the sort of final part of the plot really kicks in around this point, because we talked about sort of a small number of things happening. I think one of the other things that feels a bit weird about this book is you get sort of 200 pages in and not a great deal has happened. Like, a lot of little things have happened, but in terms of big plot, they built a railway line, and it's gone quite well. But then this is where the two plots kind of really come together, because in order to try and mend relationships with the trolls and more generally the opinion that other people are having of the dwarfs because of all of the stuff that's going on with the grags, the Low King decides to attend a summit in Quirm where Diamond King of Trolls is also going to be. And while he's away, Ardent and his grags stage a coup where they basically declare their intention to seize the throne and become leaders of the dwarfs again. And they don't actually do it. There's a sort of a weird, they've kind of started to do it, but they haven't fully done it kind of situation, which I actually did find a little bit hard to grasp exactly what was going on there. But there's a problem in that they can't just declare themselves Low King of the Dwarfs. It is an elected position, and it would have to come with the assent of a majority of the kings of dwarfs, like the other kings, who are the lead mine engineers of their various mines. And so there's a bit of, is it going to work or is it not? But it's clear the intent is there while the Low King is away. And this is why Vetinari has been insisting that there must be a line to Ubervold. And there's never any point where he sort of says, or anybody says to him, oh, you knew this was going to happen. This is why you wanted the train. But it seems pretty clear that he knew this was going to happen, and this is why he wanted the train line. And so he's now like, time is now. You've got to get the train to go, because you've got to get the Low King back to Ubervold as soon as possible, because if we wait too long, it's going to be too late to stop this, because they're currently trying to gain the support of all the other kings from all the other mines. And if it spreads too far before the king has got a chance to stop it, it will be unstoppable. So we've got to get him back there really quickly. And Moise is like, but the line's not finished. And the big problem is that towards the end of the line, there's this big pass, a big gorge where there's only a very rickety bridge and it's not ready for a train to travel over. But they've more or less built the rest of the line. So it's like, okay, how are we going to make this work? That's the big problem. But Moise is like, we'll figure it out. It's fine. And they introduce the idea of logistics, which is a humorous Discworld mispronunciation of logistics, which is, the idea of figuring out what you got to do, doing it one part at a time. And we're not sure how he's going to solve this problem, but this is the most, I feel, we'll get to the resolution of it, but I feel like this is the most moisty bit of the book, for one of a less disgusting term, in that he's got this seemingly impossible problem to solve, and he's got a solution to it.
We know what the solution is, though. Like, it's you get the Eagles to come pick you up from Moria and then straight to Mount Doom.
Nah, you get eaten.
Straight to Mount Doom. You can drop the ring in from the air.
You can't. It's not open to the air.
You can.
Is this Pratchett saying that, like Lord of the Rings would have been much simpler if there was a train line?
Yes. A train line straight to Mount Doom.
Yeah. If you could commute from Mordor, then, your working life as an orc would be a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. You live in the Shire and...
The orcs would all give up their horrible ways and just get jobs in the city, I guess.
Become hairdressers.
Yeah. I don't know.
Meat's back on the menu.
Because it doesn't go off, because it gets delivered quickly. Yeah, okay. But this is the whole, last, I don't want to say third. It's more like a quarter, or maybe it is a third or 2/5 of the book, is this, we've got to get the king to Ubervold. They pick him up from Quirm, they bring him back to Ankh-Morpork, put him on another train in disguise, and off they go. And this is the sort of punctuated action sequence that takes, it's a long time. Like, the journey takes 4 days. So, and we spend most of that 4 days in the prose, in the present, seeing what happens to them as they go. And there's various sort of cool bits of action and weird stuff that happens as they go. And yeah, this is kind of like a really exciting main part of the book, I guess, that the rest of it's been building up to.
Mm.
I feel like it's not really been building up to it, kind of sort of, there's been clues to it, but it is still very exciting. It just, I was expecting the book to just sort of carry along at the same sort of pace, brief bit about going to Uberworld, but no, it was like a big chunk of the book.
Yeah. And this is where we get a lot of our favorite characters showing, like a lot of the watch goes along on the train as well. So Vimes is there, Detritus is there, Constable Blue John, the biggest troll, is there. I love Blue John. What a great character. I don't know why. I just really like him. Everybody's there and they're on the train. And it's interesting to put a story on a train because then you're in the one place in some sense, but then you're also in lots of places as well. So it's kind of this midway point between a narrative which is all about travel and a narrative that is rooted in place with a distinct setting. I thought that was really, because when we get to the questions, I'll be, copping to this again, but I haven't read a lot of railway fiction. It's not an area that I am familiar with, but I quite enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, because it's like and again, everyone gets very funny about the term bottle episode, but it's kind of like a bottle episode if the bottle was moving through a lot of different places.
Yeah. So a lot of things happen on this journey to Uberwalds. I don't know that we'll go through all of them, but we'll kind of touch on the main bits, which are mostly that they get attacked a few times along the way. There's an assassination attempt on Moist. There's a train derailment. There's a landslide set up by some kids. There's all kind of little things that happen. And there's also a couple of major attacks on the train until they get to the bridge, which we'll deal with because that's like a major plot point. But what are people's favorite bits along the way before they get to the bridge?
Moist's foray into third class and his use of boffo vomit, I think, was a nice sort of bringing back of a thing that I enjoy, which is vomit. No, it's boffo. So
yeah, that was fun because they're all in disguise as they get on the train. They don't want anyone to know that the king is on the train.
Yeah. Some good disguises on the train that we don't even find, or did you figure out like one of the disguises that we don't find out till the end of the book, or?
No, and there's a big reveal at the end of the book that somebody was someone else, but I feel like it wasn't really set up. But this is one of the biggest things that when I was saying that, the setup and payoff was a bit off in this book, that was the biggest one. I was like, why? But there were no there was no. It doesn't feel like a proper payoff if there's no clues. And also the character who is revealed to be another character is literally mentioned in one scene and is in one other scene. And that's it. And I'm like, so why do we care? Like, it was cool, but I feel like a lot more could have been made of it. Yeah.
I agree. And just to spoil it, so Vetinari was on the train as a different character, and we find that out at the end. And I feel like it would have been a great way to like fix something that I really didn't enjoy through the whole book, which was the crossword thread, which like pains me to say. They kept bringing up that he was frustrated with the crossword setter, and then like these words that I had to keep looking up. And I think we mentioned it earlier. It's not just the crossword words that I had to keep looking up. This more than usual for a Discworld book. I found myself turning to the dictionary again and again to look up words and make sure I understood the meaning. Not just ones like Latin words where the meaning is assumed, or French words where like I'm used to looking up because Agatha Christie books, they assume you all speak French, which I do not. But English words that I had never heard of being used just normally in a sentence. Anyway, there's a thread throughout of Vetinari being frustrated by the crossword. And I think there was a great opportunity to have, because we find out later that someone is pretending to be him for 2 weeks. That person's suddenly amazing at the crossword or terrible at the crossword. So like as a hint, because I think they would have just like been lost in the plot because there's a bit where the setter changes and things. But if we suddenly had a change in the attitude towards the crossword, then later when we find out that it was actually someone else, not Vetinari, then that would have, I think, lifted that up a little bit.
Yeah, I think the big problem is that the 2 weeks that he's being impersonated by someone else is the 2 weeks when the plot is not in Ankh-Morpork. He's with us the whole time, so we don't ever see the fake Vetinari until the scene right at the end of that period where they go, here's how it makes sense that Vetinari could have been on the train, and we don't even know that he was at that point. It felt really, it's a cool idea, but I just feel like it was not executed well.
In a book where meanwhile this is happening happens so much, that would have been the perfect opportunity to use a meanwhile this is happening back in Ankh-Morpork, just to give us a bit of that.
Yeah, and we don't get that.
Yeah. I really like him in some ways as a character, but at the same point I feel like his character changes from book to book a bit because like he's never the main one, and it's always whatever he needs to be for that particular story. And I thought, like there was an opportunity here to kind of get to maybe one of the reasons why he's a bit hard to pin down as a character, or that inconsistent nature of how he comes across, and potentially it's because it's not always him, it's somebody else.
That would have been fun.
Yeah, because the fact that there's someone else who looks like him is established in an earlier book too. That's in the truth. But yeah, it doesn't really. It's a very minor plot point in this book that doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, but they nod to that as an option early on, because he says, like, when he's talking about the armored train, like early in the book, going to Uberworld, he's like, but obviously I would go on dressed like as a normal person the day before and send someone who looks like me. So there is a little bit of foreshadowing.
That's right. I had forgotten that. That's true.
But yeah, it's really early on and very, like, I guess it's not following the normal. I'm going to mention it a handful of times just to make sure it's not missed.
And also the payoff isn't that good. He's just there. And also he must have been spending a lot of time doing this beforehand, because he's not just a train worker. He's like the most famous stoker, right? Like he's the one that all the others tell stories about because he's the best at shovel combat, which is such a fun idea as well. But yeah, I don't know. But I liked it, but yeah, I felt like the execution could have been better. Although you're right about that other mention at the start of the book. And there's a couple of other things too, like really early on. I think it's Harry King is describing Iron Girder and says something like, oh yeah, I believe one day he'll even make this train fly. And that sort of happens by the end of the book. So, you know, there's a couple of little bits of telegraphing or, yeah. Any other favorite bits of the journey before we get to the bridge?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was the bit when I was just really racing through and making sure I was done.
Yeah,
like a train on the way to Uberworld.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we talked about this in the episode before we started recording. We were relating that when we were reading this book, we talked about before, it feels like the kind of book you just want to sit down and read a little bit of every now and then, but we had a deadline. So I think all of us at some point went, oh, I got to finish this book by the date. And sort of sped through the end of it a bit more than we did the start. But I feel like that's reminiscent of the train and the plot. You know, we start off slow and then we get up to steam, and away we go.
You were going to say up to snuff because we've done snuff already. So
no, I wasn't going to say that. I did like there's the bit I kind of alluded to it already. There's a bit where various things are happening. There's like ambushes of the water towers and the coal deposits along the line. But there's one bit where the train stops, and it's not because of something the dwarfs have done. There's these kids who are like flagging down the train, and they're like, hey, we didn't want you to get destroyed. There's like a landslide around the corner. And Moist goes out to have a look, and there is like this stuff on the track. But he immediately twigs that these kids they've done it on purpose so that they could flag down the train and be heroes for saving the train. And I think this is a reference to another book, which I haven't read. It's one of those children's books about kids' adventures on the railways. But Moist really gives her a dressing down. Like he puts a fear of God into them a bit. He's like, have you ever seen a train crash? Can you imagine what it would be like? And like gives them a bit of a, not fully graphic, but enough of a description that the kids like go white-faced and like, oh, we hadn't really thought about, we might have killed a bunch of people. And he's like, look, I appreciate your imagination, but maybe just write these stories down instead of actually doing the thing. And then has a word to their dad about them. I found it weird at the time because I felt like it was referencing something I didn't know, but I also kind of enjoyed that bit. Yeah, I liked it.
Wonder if it is referencing something.
I think it is. I will look that up and put it in the episode notes.
Or let us know. Like send us a message if you know what it is and would like to educate us.
Yeah, please fill us in. But they deal with various kind of problems and setbacks along the line, including one that's not really an attack or anything. It's just that they get to the last train station that's already been built along the line, and the people in the town there at Ohlan Kadash are so excited that the train is here that they've prepared this whole festival. And Moist is kind of like, we have to go. Like we're in a hurry. But then they're like, well, but we're kind of ahead of schedule. I guess we could stay for the dinner and stuff. And they just pause for a bit to indulge the town, which I thought was nice.
Yeah. Politeness will get you killed.
I think I just remembered the landslide thing you were talking about. The railway children. Isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I've never read nor watched it.
No, I think I was subjected to it when I was a kid because I think it's my mum's favourite book or film or something like that. I think there's like a 1970s film. But yeah, there's a bit in there that something the kids see, like a landslide that obstructs the tracks. They live like near this train line. And then they really sort of urgently weave they're like dresses or clothes or something into bright red things so they can flag down the train. And it's this kind of big powerful moment. But obviously, this is Pratchett saying,
Yeah, saying like,
don't do this shit.
I don't believe those kids. They made this. they made this happen. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Railway Children. I've never read it. Now I'm scared to. Okay, they're sinister kids, and Pratchett's picked this up. I don't know.
Yeah.
That is a very Pratchett deconstruction of the thing. That's fun. But yeah, so they pause there, but then they eventually get to the Villainous Pass, which we've visited before. It was a prominent location in Thud. It's near Coombe Valley. You have to go across it to get to Uberwald. There is a bridge, but it's an old rickety bridge that is not designed to carry a train. And everyone's like, okay, Moist, you said you could do this. How is this going to happen? And he says, oh, but don't worry. See, there's this fog. You might not know this, but the fog in this area is solid. You can stand on it. Check this out. And he goes and walks off the edge of the cliff and stands on the fog. And everyone's like, what? And then Vimes is like, let me have a go. Chuffs on his cigar and he sort of goes out there and he's like, yep, that works. And then he comes back and Moist is like, so what do you reckon, Dick Simnel? Do you believe? And they've had a couple of conversations at this point where things have happened where it seems like the original locomotive, which they're using for this journey, Iron Girder, is alive. There's an instance where a dwarf breaks into the warehouse and tries to sabotage it and gets vaporized by steam. There's a bit where Moist is worried that Dick's sweetheart, one of Harry King's nieces, is going to, be destroyed by the train because it's jealous of her. But then she just sort of skips up to it and says, oh, how are you doing this morning? You're a beautiful girl, and like wipes her with a sleeve or a handkerchief or something and stays incredibly clean. And you're like, oh,
no matter what, she's always clean in her white dress, even in situations where Dick would get completely covered in soot.
Yeah. Which is, a sign that the train loves her. But I'm sure that it's a reference to some kind of bit of fiction where there's an improbably white dress on a steam train somewhere. But there's all these little conversations and they sort of have a talk about it. And at this point, Moist sort of says, well, so what do you reckon, Dick? And Dick says, well, look, I believe in the slide rule. I believe in the sine and the cosine and the tangent. And I believe in the maths. But I also believe in Iron Girder and you. So let's go. And they do it. They drive the train onto the bridge, and it's very rickety and it feels very dangerous, but then the train sort of lifts up and gets all smooth and kind of flies through the air and then comes back down onto ground. And we're like, how the fuck did you do that, Moist von Lipwig? And we immediately get a flashback which shows us how he did it, which is he asked Vetinari, can I use the ancient golems that we found in my last book? He doesn't put it like that, but that's what he's saying. To help me. And Vetinari's like, no, we buried them because they are potentially weapons of war. And if there's any evidence that you have used them, you'll be in trouble. and Moist's like, I'm getting what you're putting down here, Chief. And
it's not track.
There's no evidence because he gets them to dig underground all the way to the pass, and they are hiding in the fog, and somehow through their various golem abilities, they pick up the train and carry it across. Really
I hope he later uses that tunnel to just do an underground. I know someone else is already doing an underground, but since you already got the tunnel.
You bring up a good point, Liz, because yes, in this book, the goblins make their own underground railway. And
I thought that was going to be the solution.
Yeah, but there's already in 2 previous books, Vetinari has talked about the undertaking, which is clearly some form of underground railway for Ankh-Morpork, which originally, the way he talked about it, was going to be powered by this ancient dwarf device, which could provide power for the whole system. But that doesn't really go anywhere. And instead, here we get a regular train system on the surface and goblins making their own underground train system. And there's no mention of that anymore. Which again there's a few things in this book where that it doesn't quite line up. I mean, I understand continuity is not particularly important to Terry Pratchett, and I applaud that attitude. Like, what's best for the story you're telling now? What's best for the joke that I want to make? But there are some ways in which it just feels like this book, particularly because it has so many callbacks to stuff from previous books. It's just on every page. Even with these golems, like it's from only a few books earlier, but if you hadn't read that book, I think you'd be like, what are these golems? Why is the whole resolution of this plot relying on something that happened in another book?
But maybe that's why he's riding the golem horse throughout this, to remind you that, because I mentioned them from time to time, but they're having this whole thing about him riding Flash and giving Flash like a glimpse of freedom, and then who develops as a character. So it shows that it reminds you that golems exist. It reminds you that he knows how to control them. and that he will treat them with respect. So I feel like maybe that's what that was about. So we didn't have to have so much of the horse. Otherwise, as much as I loved, like, give me livery or give me death, like that was like my favorite line of the book. And really yes, I will enjoy myself if you insist that I do it. Like, but maybe that's what that was about, laying the groundwork for this otherwise sort of seemingly like Deus Ex Machina kind of thing.
That makes sense. But do you think we had, like, either of you, do you think we had enough context? Like, if you hadn't read Making Money reasonably recently, or at least knew what happened in it, do you think there's enough here that you wouldn't be like,
I think given the overall book being like I stick by what I said at the beginning, it's like being a +1 at a school reunion. I think this book has so much assumed knowledge that the golems popping up and fixing this problem fits in with the overall nature of the book, which is, if you had not read a Discworld book before this, you'd be like, I'm not quite sure what's happening, and it would all kind of feel like that. So no, it's not enough context, but neither is most of the book.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. That's fair. I think the setup and the payoff could have been handled a bit better, but it is still a pretty satisfying moment, even if it's all revealed in a flashback immediately rather than later on, which might have been slightly more satisfying. I don't know, but it's fun. It's fun. And look, the other thing that's happening is that from the spoils of fighting with the dwarfs, Moist has collected some micromail, which is, I don't know that they use the term mithril, but it's basically mithril, right? It's this incredibly tough ore that the dwarfs mine and make things out of. And Dick uses it to make a new alloy with steel called sorotanium, sister of iron, and he clads all of Iron Girder in it, which is how it's able to resist all of these dwarf attacks. That was kind of fun, but also a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card in some senses.
But kind of poetic that, like, the thing that protects them against the dwarves is the thing that they took from the dwarves who were attacking them. So, like, there's a sort of a nice, there's a beauty there.
It's very role-playing gamey, you know? Like, you defeat the dragon and you find the dragon-slaying sword kind of deal, you know? But then there's always another dragon, so it works out.
It's kind of like you take the dragon's scales that you defeated and it saves you from another dragon.
Yes, absolutely. But they get over the bridge and there's one final big assault on the train. And, that's a fun part because they fight on top of the train, and which is something that Moist does a bit earlier. He's like, I always wanted to do this. And he climbs up on the top of the train while it's running. And I was like, that is the most Moist bit of the book. If we remember, like, Making Money starts with him pretending to be a burglar and trying to break into his own house.
Have you seen that bit in the second most recent Mission Impossible where, it's on a train and they're having this big fight on it, and like another character, like Tom Cruise has this like massive plan to get onto the train, and it's all failing, and the person on the train is having this big fight, and he's trying to figure out how to get there. And I can't remember, like, he goes off a motorcycle off a cliff, which was like the most expensive stunt of that one, and then you don't see what happens to him, and then the person that you care about on the train's like being killed by a henchman, and then all of a sudden Tom Cruise just smashes through the window in the parachute and knocks through like one of the guys and saves the person's life. It just has like that energy. It's just like so silly but so good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you that story. I'm sorry. It's not that related. It's just very funny that it's like, oh no, what's going to happen? And just like he smashes through the exact correct window of the exact correct carriage into the bad guy and not the person he's trying to rescue. Like, you can't plan it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I feel like my favorite bit is not necessarily similar, but I think it parodies moments from films like that, where there's always that bit where people are fighting on top of a train and the hero suddenly throws themselves to the deck and the villain's like, why, what's going on? And then turns around and gets, wiped out by a tunnel. In this,
or a helicopter.
Or a helicopter. That's true. But Moist is fighting a dwarf and realizes there's a tunnel coming up, and he flattens himself on the train, and they go into the tunnel, and he's like, oh wait, the dwarf's too short. They haven't been knocked over, but their axe is like scraping sparks off the roof. And then he kicks him in a fork and off he goes off the train.
Beautiful stuff.
That's the other thing we should say. By this point, when they stop in Sto Lat and they stay at Dick's mum's house on the way to Ubervold, his mum is like a noted midwife and is slightly sus when making the king comfortable. And this makes Moist kind of go, oh, something's up there. But she won't say what it is. And then he confronts them on the train. Now, I thought because she was a midwife and because we already know, readers, that the Low King is a woman, right? I thought the revelation would be she's pregnant. And when Moist confronts them, she just gives up that she's female, and that's it. And he's like, okay, you're the low queen. All right, great. And it's a big deal to Moist because Moist doesn't know that. It's not a big deal to people who've read the previous Discworld books because we already knew this. And I was like, is it not going to be that she's pregnant? Because like that would be kind of, I don't know. I mean, she's doing some dangerous stuff while pregnant. Like it's maximum respect, but also be careful, dwarf.
She is, isn't she? Like I feel like
she is. And that there's a second reveal in front of all of the dwarfs because once they get past all the fighting and they get to Bianca and the Low King gets to Schmaltzberg, just kind of gathers all of the loyal dwarfs and the king heads in there and there is a fight, but it's also, how did you feel about this bit of the book? Because I found it a little bit confusing as to what actually was happening because they keep saying like, we're going to try and not have too much bloodshed. We're going to try and talk everyone around, but also there's a lot of fighting and a lot of people dying. And there is some dialogue about that and discussion on the train earlier where they're trying to get the Low King to lay out what the plan is. And the plan's like, well, we don't want to kill too many people, but there's going to have to be some killing. And then we get that and it is like that. Like there's some killing, but not everybody. And you're like, oh, it feels a bit anticlimactic in a way. But I guess I don't know. What did you think about that?
There's too much action concentrated in one bit of the book, perhaps. So like it didn't land in a way that it might otherwise have. But perhaps it does reflect the chaos of the dwarves in general.
Yeah, and I think it's probably like a melding of those moments from before when we're bouncing between what's happening with the dwarves when it's quite violent and then the rest of the story. And then now it's like, how do we kind of reconcile this into something where, yes, there's violence, but also we don't want to have the reality of that kind of take over because it would really change the tone.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. For me, I found the dwarf plot a bit underwhelming in some ways because there's all this horrible violence and there's this faction of very clearly villainous dwarfs with no redeeming qualities, right? Because we also have other grags and dwarfs who respect the traditions of dwarf life who are not being horribly violent. So it's not like there's some conflict there where, oh, can you uphold these traditions without being violent? It's like, yes, you can, but you're choosing not to, right? And then it's resolved it's kind of just not resolved because they can't track them down and they go into hiding. And then it is resolved because they pop up to try and take over. And then the king comes back and says, not on my watch. You know, like it didn't feel like it had a bigger point to make or I don't know.
It's not really resolved as well because like she did like do her big like angry speech earlier in the book and even had the support of one of the more hardline dwarfs who was like, we can't be like this. So not that much has changed. Like, I don't feel like saying that she's a woman and that she's pregnant and that they've had this tiny fight is going to really, because like what's emphasized throughout the whole book is that that line, 2 is an argument, 3 is a war, and the disagreement isn't really resolved. So like what's going to stop it popping off again in a week's time with some others?
There is kind of the suggestion that the king's closest, more conservative or more traditional ally, Albrecht Albrechtsson, who is in charge while the king's away and gets imprisoned, has quite a revelation while imprisoned, talking to a goblin who's helping him keep in touch with everybody else. And it publicly accepts the Low King when she comes out and says, I'm not going to be a king anymore. And everyone's like, what does that mean? No, don't not be the king. She said, no, because I'm a woman, I'm going to be your queen. And I think the other thing about that is it feels a bit different in 2025 in that it doesn't feel, I think I was more aware of the fact that dwarf culture is meant to be different about the way that they consider gender. And it felt more like making it conform with just gender norms where it's like men and women have to be different. You're like, I mean, I know this is a whole thing with the dwarfs in the book before, but it just, I don't know, there's something about this where I'm like, yeah, but I mean, do you have to change the title? Could you just not be, I'm a woman and I'm still your king? Do you have to introduce gendered language into dwarf culture? I don't know. There was something about it that just felt a bit weird. But I think it is an important moment that she makes that public declaration of, I'm going to be like a modern Ankh-Morpork dwarf. I'm going to be out as a woman. You're going to know that I'm a woman, whereas usually that would be secret. And I'm going to still be your monarch. But I'm actually going to go so far as to change my title. And look at this. My most traditional ally accepts this. And I feel like that is meant to be, this is why this is going to work out.
I guess maybe my 2025 lived experience of politics since this book has come out that has made me more pessimistic about that as an ending, because it feels as though when you have a progressive breakthrough on the political stage, what comes after that is a massive regression. So that's why I think that I'm like, cool, this is good now, but a week was too short, but like a couple of years down the line, like you're going to have all the people whispering, like the original Grags might not have any power, but like my pessimism is that it's not going to hold because fundamental things have not changed. Yes, this one ally is now on her side, but like you haven't fixed the rot at the core of it. So, and I don't know if you can, because the whole point is that by their nature they disagree. So it's a fine thing to happen in this book and good and nice, but if it were real life, if this were real life, I think if we had books set 5-10 years later, it would have regressed. It's not fixed. Just to throw some positivity out there.
I mean, is that part of this book sort of, you know, that coziness of this book in a way, even though it's got those sort of violent bits, is part of that kind of slightly more old-fashioned, but the good guys will prevail because they're right kind of attitude?
I think cozy is a great way to put it. Like, this is like a cozy book, and if we lean into that lens on this book, which covers class, which covers assimilation's handled a bit more shakily in that one. So I think I'll put that aside from this discussion. Then, yeah, I think we can have a sort of more positive, like, it would probably turn out okay because it is a cozy fantasy version of how things might turn out. And through that lens, then perhaps this does fix things for a while, at least for the dwarves.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we do get a little bit of denouement at the end here. So after this big resolution of the plot with the dwarfs, there's a bit of downtime. The bridge collapsed after the train went over it, so the train has to stay in Uberwald while the bridge is rebuilt. And this is where Moist takes an opportunity to talk to the train and say, "What are you?" And it more or less just says, "I'm the god of trains." And I'm like, yeah, okay, yep, that tracks. There's a little bit right at this. What was that?
It tracks. That's very good.
Oh, no, I didn't even mean that one. I think this is indicative, right? So much of our language comes from, particularly in the modern day, post-World Wars, comes from like military terminology, sports terminology, which draws on military terminology, or from railway terminology, right? Because it did have such a huge impact on our lives. So when we say things like "it tracks" or "get on board" or
know
any
your
of those
station,
things,
which is military, not trains, but it works for both.
Yeah, true. It fits in. There's all those sort of bits of stuff in our language that, yeah, it's hard not to make puns about. But yeah, so he finds that out and is like, okay, fair enough. Then goes back home, and there's it feels a bit like the end of the first Star Wars movie, actually, because there's one scene where there's this big awards ceremony and everyone involved gets given at least a medal.
Except
Harry
for one.
King. Oh yeah, Moist does not get one.
So very much like Star Wars.
Yeah, true. And then some of the others get promotions, like Harry King gets a new title. Again, Moist gets nothing except you get to stay alive, which is pretty rough, but you know, he's doing all right. And then he reveals to Moist that, yeah, I was there. I was Stoker Blake. I helped you. I was keeping an eye on you. He's like, but you got away with it this time, Moist. You're not in trouble for using those golems because there's no evidence that that's what you did. And then they kind of muse about what might be next and how much quiet time Moist is going to have before the next thing happens that he's got to look into. Sybil and Vimes have a similar kind of dinner conversation where she's like, I think I'd quite like to take a little holiday on the train to Uberwald. And Vimes is like, yeah, we could do that. But you know, I always find a crime wherever I go. Setting up the Discworld equivalent of Murder on the Orient Express, of course. And then the last scene in the book, there's a little kind of an allusion to this earlier in the book where Blue John uses a handcar to catch up to the train because at one point the guard's carriage gets disconnected by the attacking dwarfs and the big troll gets out a handcart and uses all his strength to catch up to it.
That's a classic.
But it's got like a pedal mechanism where you operate with your hands, and Moist kind of clocks it and goes, oh, Imagine if you could kind of do that on your own. And at the end of the book, there's a goblin showing his new invention to Vetinari, which is clearly a bicycle. And you're like, yes, goblin bicycles. I want the bicycle book. That's what I want. But then I just love bicycles. So, yeah.
It's almost like it could be around the Discworld in 80 days.
Oh, yeah, that would be fun, wouldn't it?
Like the Tour de Quorum.
Then you could trains and
Yeah. Oh, that'd be fun. I'd be up for that. That sounds cool.
That'd actually make a good board game.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would make a good game.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's got in my head. I mean, I don't have the power to make any Discworld board games, but maybe I'll design something and pitch it to the powers that do, because there's a bunch of new ones coming out. Mm. But that's the plot, essentially. Like, we skipped over a lot of stuff because, like, as we've kind of alluded to, there are a lot of little standalone scenes and little vignettes and stuff in here. And I feel like we kind of will have a question about that, so I don't want to get too much into that now. But are there any other parts of the book or favorite jokes that we want to mention before we get on to listener questions?
Just Flash's whole storyline, the Golem horse, because like we'd seen them before, and just seeing him develop a personality and and some wants as well was nice.
Yeah, that was fun. I did like the Golem horse.
Oh, and I did like Simnel's thing early on when he's like Simnel and Harry King's dynamic, like in the very early bits was good, where they're figuring out money and he acts real simple to see how Harry treats him. And Harry's like, no, you got to go like look after your interests. You got to like actually do things, because he could have absolutely taken him for a ride. And he's like, oh, good. I was pretending because my mom gave me advice to see like how people treat you. So you seem like a good guy and will do this. And then later but he's still a little bit naive. So when Harry's like, I'm going to send some of my heavies to look after your stuff back home. And he's like, okay, well, I'll send my mum a letter to let her know that you're coming, basically, so that she deactivates all the booby traps that he's set up. So that, so the little hints into like the edges of Simnel were quite good.
Mm.
Yeah, that was fun.
I just liked his name as well. It was just like another in a long line of names where Pratchett comes up with, and it feels it's either a pun or a euphemism or both, but it's not at the same time, and it's just fun.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it just sounds like a trained person, doesn't it?
Mm.
Dick Simnel sounds like it would have been a real person at the age of steam.
Oh, absolutely. Or someone now on British TV who like does one of those like those British TV stars who goes around on railways and does a docuseries that's very slow moving but utterly charming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he is clearly partly based on a person who was exactly that, who had a TV show about restoring old steam trains and had a very distinct like northern accent, which he does throughout the book, like in the slang he uses and the way he says, you know, he talks about to slide rule and stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm.
I've got a couple of favorite bits, but I think they're going to come up in the questions. So I think let's push on into those.
Right. So our first question comes from Molokov via Discord, who says, I have found that on a recent reread, Raising Steam has so many great scenes, both ones full of character dialogue and ones that are mostly narration. Did any such scenes stand out for you, no matter how related to the main storyline or not?
Yeah. My favorite little scene that's like not really related to the plot, it's just one of many that, because the sort of little standalone scenes come in kind of two flavors. They're either, here's what the horrible dwarfs are doing and how it's affecting people, or here's one of the ways in which the adventures of our heroes or the railway is affecting people. And my favorite one is in the station in Stolat, where a dwarf sits down next to a troll and starts talking to her, and they discover they're both librarians and they run away together. And I was like, this is so cute. I love this. And it's kind of phrased as like something that could only happen in the age of the train, because now you can get on a train and go immediately to somewhere far away. And I kind of like that. And also the dwarf librarian in that pairing is called Dopey Docson. And I thought I would really get sick of, because he'd already done like Bashful Son, and there's a couple of other ones that are 7 dwarf names. And I thought I was done with them, but then Dopey Docson, I'm like, that's funny. I liked it.
Tis. Yeah. I might actually add the rest of Molokov's question to sort of enhance on, which is, do any of the one scene characters stick in your mind? And Molokov adds, we just finished reading Mrs. Bradshaw's handbook, so much great bonus Discord info about all the towns the railway now visits after Raising Steam, which reminds me that Mrs. Bradshaw scene was wonderful, like where you meet this widow who is just out to see the world and then happens to be a beautiful writer who then sort of starts being the first travel writer on the trains.
And I liked how they said you could trust her because she was the kind of person who could wear her expensive jewelry at the beginning of the trip and still have it with her at the end of the trip. She could clearly handle herself.
Yeah, and so much character information packed into such a small bit of information. And that's like a thing that Pratchett does so well, like just a beautiful bit of observation. And that just speaks volumes about her.
Yeah, I think she was probably the most well-realized of those little side characters because there are quite a lot of them. I started making a list of them and I kind of didn't keep up with it because there were so many. But yeah, there's lots of fun little characters who pop up for a scene and you never see again. Like the Jeffries cousins, I think they are, complaining right at the start of the book about the state of exporting your goods to the city and how difficult it is because one of them's a seafood merchant and the other one's a market gardener. They were nice, but we never see them again. We never hear them again. Yeah.
I don't know if it counts as characters, but the thing where they talk about on the border of Chrome and Ankh-Morpork, there's farmers who like live on the border and talk over each other's fences, even though they are in different countries or counties, and then often they marry one another. And this little line, governments really hate this, and that, like because that's why there's like pockets of places that speak both languages because it's like blurring their border. And I just think that's also just a nice little bit of political commentary.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any favorites, Craig?
Most of mine were all just either like these little just character bits. Like I think it was a troll and a dwarf. It could have been a goblin and a dwarf where they talked about how they found out they both supported Dolly Sisters United or something like that. And just like tiny little turns of phrases and things that, again, like they really just sort of skewer a character perfectly with absolute economy. And I think they were the bits I liked. I was really enjoying the drawing of, I think were they brothers? And the one was called Crucible.
Oh, yeah. The two brothers who try to
Jed?
make a steam engine and it blows up and vaporizes them. Yeah.
So I was enjoying that and then it turned grim. But,
I like those guys too. Yeah. That was really sad.
But Harry looked after their mother and said that he would ensure that the names are sort of like living on in steam engine history. Still very sad, but I think that was also a separate way to look into Harry's character as well.
Yeah. He gets a lot of nice moments like that in this book.
Oh, and the Low King taking on as her name Blodwen, the bride who was killed early on in the marriage between a dwarf and a human. I thought that was quite a nice detail because otherwise that sort of the horrors were skipped a little bit of that, but it showed that was important to them.
Yeah, that was lovely. So before we get on to our next question, Liz, I just want to acknowledge that Lachlan on our Discord had a lot of feelings about this book. It's a big comfort book for him, and I totally get where he's coming from. He's a big train fan as well, which we'll get to when we get to his question. He really felt like we kind of do. It's a bit of a victory lap of the Ankh-Morpork characters. He characterized it like a season finale where they're unsure if they'll get renewed, which kind of, there's reasons why we understand this book might feel that way. And I think that nails the feeling of this book is that we do.
Absolutely.
We see so many people. I mean, we see Queen Kelly from Mort shows up in one scene. And it's just mentioned, doesn't have any actual dialogue, although she does give a speech. We don't hear it. Just stuff like that where it's like, remember these folks? And that is kind of nice. So I thought that was great. And also points out that about halfway through, the book really speeds up where months pass by in a couple of pages, and that does seem a lot faster, and that there's a lot more time covered in this book than any other one. And interestingly, just to riff on that, it's also one of the few books that gives us a specific time point in the series because someone does specifically say it's 8 years since a certain other thing happened. So this is 8 years after the Fifth Elephant, when Vimes meets up with some of the characters. Say, it's been 8 years since I saw you or since we did this thing together. So that gives us a real kind of time frame for the stories as well.
When one of the small characters was saying that I was at Coombe Valley, I'm like, but that was like a month ago because that book is recent. I was like, wait, no. So
but like a year passes in this book, so it's not. It's a while ago now. Well, because even some years pass between Thud and Snuff, because Thud is just when Sam is a baby, and by Snuff he's like a little kid who's wandering around being interested in things and reading books. So there's time passing. So thank you, Lachlan, for all those comments. They're really great. But you also had a question. Liz, what was Lachlan's question?
All right, so Lachlan's question via Discord is, what are your favorite fantasy train settings between Iron Dragon, a board game with a novel as the failed attempt at the new franchise, Raising Steam, Perdido Saint Station, Iron Council, and any number of Weird West settings? There's plenty around. This is a tough question. Like, I looked at it earlier, and I'm still, like, trying to find my good answer. Does Westworld count? Like, I know it's not all set on a train, but the train is pretty important in Westworld.
It's got fantasy.
And then, not fantasy, but there's a crime novel I really enjoyed called Tokyo Express, I think. It's a Japanese one that was translated, I think, from the 40s. And a lot of it hinges on train timetables. So it's a good one.
I'll pay that.
Not a great answer from me, but that's my favorite train literature and screen.
That's okay. I mean, I feel like the niche of like fantasy and trains, it's a great niche, but it's not necessarily a big one. I mean, it is if you know it. Like, there's lots of ones in there, but you know, if you're just a general fantasy reader, you might never have read a fantasy book that has a train. But Craig, have you got one?
Yeah, I was probably thinking the same. Like, I don't think I know. I'm aware of Perdido Street Station, but I hadn't read it. But then I suddenly Stephen King's Dark Tower books, and particularly The Wasteland. But then it creeps over into the next one, which is Wizard and Glass. But it basically hinges on this big showdown on an evil train that plays riddles in a very Tolkien riddles in the dark kind of references to it. There's all these kind of contemporary stuff that comes out, but it's this very kind of psychotic evil train that is holding the characters hostage whilst they play riddles with it. And then the book kind of ends, and then it kind of comes back again in the next book at the beginning of it. And then because one of the characters who's like a child and is pulled from our real world into this fantasy setting, when that child is in the real world, is going to like an old bookstore and is seeing all these clues about the fantasy world they're going to get pulled into, and discovers this children's book about this evil train. And they ended up publishing like a little children's book about this evil train as like an additional thing to the series. Anyway, I just remember that, but it's very cool.
That is cool. That's cool.
How about you, Ben?
Well, I had trouble with this question mainly because there's quite a few when I started to think about it. And there's quite a few role-playing games, actually, that have cool stuff with trains. So Lachlan mentioned Weird West settings, which is that idea of like mixing the supernatural in with the Old West. And there's a great old role-playing game called Deadlands, which is exactly that. It's a Weird West game. And the trains in that run on a particular kind of ore, which is infused with like spirit stuff, which I've forgotten what it's called, but they run really hot. And there's also a lot of like sort of quote unquote mad science in those books where people think they're doing cutting edge science, but actually they're kind of drawing on magical energy from somewhere that's maybe not great to draw magical energy from. And there's a lot of train stuff related to that. So that's fun. Deadlands. There's another role-playing game called Heart and Spire. They're two games, but they kind of go together. And Spire is the conceit of it is that there's this huge spire-shaped city that used to be inhabited by someone ages ago, and these dark elves have moved into it because they can live above ground in the darkness because it's inside. And then they've been taken over by these other elves and now have become like an oppressed underclass. But one of the features of the Spire is that its original builders were seemingly building some sort of train network through it that's called the Vermissian, but was never finished, and it has this sort of weird interdimensional kind of aspect to it, so that if you go in there, you don't necessarily come out the same. And one of the classes that you can play is someone who is part of that Vermissian network, and your armor is like made of bits of train. And you have all these like train-based powers, like you can just smash through walls or arrive on time and stuff like that. So
can trains do those things?
Yeah, if you're not careful.
I meant arrive on time.
Oh, yeah, sure. Just at the right time, maybe sometimes. So there's a few other games as well, but I think fiction-wise, I really like Ben Aronovich's work, the Peter Grant novels, and there's one, Whispers Underground, which has a lot to do with the underground train system in London. And the trains themselves are not particularly magical, but there's definitely fantasy attached to them. And there's other ones. I could keep going, but I'll stop there. But there's lots of cool ones. Maybe I'll list a few more in the episode notes.
I also realized I made a Snowpiercer joke earlier, then failed to mention it in this section. But I am fishing in an extremely limited pool for me. I did enjoy both the TV series and the film. I have not read the original source material though. So it's a great premise though, like that this is perpetually moving train is the only thing that's helping keeping a pocket of the human population alive in a extreme climate change scenario. But yet they're still hanging on to the class system so desperately within that. Like it is a good premise.
Yeah. Actually, you've just reminded me of another
Yeah.
one. The video game I'm playing at the moment a lot is called Abiotic Factor, and it's this sort of weird mashup of survival build stuff game like Minecraft with a sort of parody of stuff like Half-Life, where you're like a scientist on your first day at this secret underground bunker facility in the Australian outback where they open portals to other universes, and it's all gone horribly wrong. But one of the other universes you can visit is just called The Train. And it's just a train, and they don't really know where it is, but they have figured out that if the train ever stops moving, it will be disastrous for possibly the entire universe. So whenever you visit it, there's a scientist at the start of the train who's just shoveling coal into its engine, just going, the train can't stop, the train can't stop. It's great. And you can find a model of the train and take it home to put in your base. So I think that's probably my current favorite. I have visited that train a few times.
All right. So our final question comes from Ian via Discord. What's everyone's favorite train story that gets nodded at here? Ian loves the nods to Brief Encountered and the Railway Children, but adores the chase sequence, which seemed to be part of every Western Ian watched as a kid. And follow-up, did Sir Terry miss a chance when he didn't have a vampire named Bram become a stoker?
Yeah, totally. Totally.
I also like to add, finally, is this the only book in existence that has a literal plot engine? Very good. That is very good. I cannot believe that got past. I'm so glad that was pointed out.
It's pretty great. Look, as far as the vampire goes, yes, I think that would have been very fun. But I feel like it would have to be that same vampire who keeps taking all the jobs that are dangerous to vampires, because surely vampires don't like fire. So if you were a stoker, you'd get instantly vaporized by the flames. And also trains run during the day. What are you going to do? You're going to hide in the train carriage?
Oh, they've got like the metal plate to get the roofs now. You're going to be okay.
That's one of the things I love about modern vampire fiction is figuring out how do they go between cities and stuff. That's good fun. But yeah, great questions. So what other train stories got nodded at that we haven't mentioned that people really liked? Liz, I think you had one.
Oh yes, and I'm going to go for the easy, because I don't know that many train stories as I think we've established, which is that Harry King is the Fat Controller from Thomas the Tank Engine, and then they even make a little train set that looks like it, and he's so pleased that he's depicted, but his wife says they've made you too overweight, but he doesn't seem to mind. So I think that's specifically in there to be like he's the Fat Controller from Thomas the Tank Engine.
And then they mention it in the blurb, which I didn't realize until I was reading it out.
Yeah. Not necessary, but sure. I mean, kids do love Thomas the Tank Engine. I'm sure they're not reading this book, but
yeah.
I mean, other than the Railway Children, which we pointed out before, I don't know if there's anything that I was really keeping front of mind, other than just the kind of general vibes, like the fight on the rooftop of the train. And you were talking about Mission Impossible before, and I remember when I saw that one in the cinema, like either a week before or a week later, I saw the last Indiana Jones film, which also contained a whole big sequence on the top of the train, which just again felt like, are we just all doing this again? We're having train rooftop fight scenes, and obviously then the one in Speed, which has like the most bizarre kind of closing line when I think Dennis Hopper loses his head. And Keanu Reeves says the difference between the two of them is he's taller, which makes no sense in the context of the scene.
Yeah. Oh, I have a dim memory of that. Yeah. Top of the bus.
But it's like that era where they're doing great lines. I just I watched for the first time the 80s Arnold Schwarzenegger Running Man. And there's just this bit where he cut someone in half and someone's like, where did that guy go? And he's like, he had to split.
We used to play an improv game based on that kind of stuff called Arnie, where what would happen is the audience would give you an ordinary household object and you had to step forward and say what Arnold Schwarzenegger would say if he'd just killed someone with it. And it was great. Like someone would go, spatula, and you'd go, he really flipped out. Or, he was over easy. Like stuff like that, And the bad Arnie impression was a part of the game, of course. Yeah. Again, I don't know that I got a lot of them because I haven't read a lot of train stories, or at least not ones that I thought were applicable. Although you did just make me think of another one. I don't know if it's a deliberate nod. There's a lot of nods to things that I did recognize, but almost none of them were the train stuff. I don't know if I spotted this, but thinking about it, the way that Iron Girder keeps getting upgraded and it's like it's got special armor, and then they've got a special little room for Moist to sleep in that's not like one of the first class carriages, but it's got all the bits in it. And then they've got the handcart concealed on the flatbed at the end of the train so Blue John can catch up if the guard train gets disconnected. Like, it felt a little bit like the train in Wild Wild West that's got all of the gimmicks and stuff and special gadgets on it, which is kind of like a mobile spy HQ. And it doesn't quite go that far, but I felt there was a little bit of a hint of that, which was fun.
Similar, but in a slightly different direction. All the bits when they kept commenting on how it seems different, like every time they look at it, like feels like it's, and that to me reminded me heaps of Pristine. And for a brief moment in reading it, I was like, is this going to take like a slightly darker turn, which would have made it a very different book, but an interesting book. But I don't, it was just, again, like, was it just something a little bit in the flavoring of it where he was just, that's a nice little added element where this thing is taking on a life of its own. It's just not in a malicious way.
I think he did want us to question that. Like, that's why they have that scene where Harry's niece, Emily, is skipping over to it in her white dress, and Moise is like, oh no.
Oh no.
It's going to run her over or vaporize her into steam.
Vaporize her was what I thought.
She's not jealous at all. She's like, yeah, it's fine. This is an open relationship between the train and the train driver and this actual human sweetheart. It's fine.
It's just more of a throuple situation because they seem to all love each other. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah, it was cute. I liked it. But then they leave her in Ubervolt for months by herself. She's going to be okay. I'm sorry, Ian, we don't have a better answer for that. What are your favourites? Ian mentioned Brief Encounter and The Railway Children. What are your favourite train stories that get a nod or a shout out or a reference in this book? Because there are we could be here. It's not really something we've ever tried to do, like list all the references in a Pratchett book, because we'd have to make a podcast 6 times as long. But if you've got some that you want to share with us, please send them in. The hashtag for this episode is Pratchat90 if you're doing it on social media. Or you can send us an email at chat@pratchatpodcast.com. I think that kind of, though, brings us to the end of the episode. Craig, thanks so much for joining us and going on this second to last journey through the Discworld with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I think, and just ultimately, thanks for the invitation to read this one, which I think I've been putting off because I've been wary of reading some of the last ones just because it would be a kind of closure, and I've just been left pending on my shelf for a while. So it was nice to have a good reason to go and look at it for the first time.
Yeah. And look, maybe listener, if you've read this book for the first time, let us know how you feel about it. This is my first time, because there's only one Discworld novel left, which is The Shepherd's Crown, which we will read as the last episode of the podcast, which won't be our next episode. We've got a few more before then, including our next episode, #Pratchat91, when we're going to be looking at the Discworld Companion. Not any particular edition, although we do have the Ultimate Edition, and we'll kind of use that one by default, but as a kind of catch-all for all the different editions of that reference work that's been written, a kind of A to Z of all the stuff in the Discworld. That's what we're going to discuss in our next episode in January. So please send us any questions you've got about that using the hashtag Pratchat91 on social media, or you can email us. So Craig, now, in your profession, you can't just sort of advertise your services. That's not really appropriate or how it works, but you do have a social media presence and you do put some really interesting stuff up there. If people want to follow you online and hear what you've got to say publicly, where can they find you?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to remind myself of what my handle is for Instagram. It's Craig HB Psychologist, all one word. That's generally where I am these days, doing my thing.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And listener, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to all of our supporters for supporting the show and letting us make the show the way that makes sense to us, in much the way that Pratchett got to write the books in the way that made sense to him. And we're going to get through them all. We're nearly there. There's actually only 2 novels left that we haven't covered, and only one of them's a Discworld novel. But there's a couple of other things we're going to squeeze in there. And they're making new things, Liz. There's new board games coming. What?
Good.
We have to keep going
I feel like
forever.
You drag me kicking and screaming to doing the board games, and every time we play one, I'm like, "Can we play it 3 more times?" You're like, "We have to record the episode." I'm like, "Okay, fine."
We'll do it. We'll do some recreational board game playing too. Yeah. That'll be fun. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Not just for the podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. You can find out more about the show at pratchatpodcast.com. If you want to support us, you can do it there. Look for the support us page. Let us know what you thought of this book. Please give us feedback. Remember, until next time, please keep all your arms and legs inside the carriage as you listen to the podcast. You've been listening to Pratchat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast with Pratchatters Elizabeth Flux, Ben McKenzie, that's me, and guest Craig Hildebrand-Burke. Pratchett is produced and edited by me on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. Our music is by David Ashton. We're on social media as Pratchett or Pratchett Podcast, and you can listen to past episodes and support the production of new ones via pratchettpodcast.com. Join the conversation for this episode using the hashtag Pratchett90.
Pratchett is brought to you by Splendid Chaps Productions. We make entertainment for your ears, like the Doctor Who podcast Splendid Chaps and time travel comedy series Night Terrors. To find out more, visit splendidchaps.com.